Chapter 707. Yi Xian stood on the spot with Yi Ling in his arms, and he didn't move. On the other hand, Li Xinghe stared fixedly at Yi Xian. He was a veteran expert of the Xuanhuan world, and he was an extraordinary expert. The Ascension Realm. He was an extraordinary expert in the Sky-Earth world. However, even he was fearful of Yi Xian. Yi Xian's potential was too great. If he was allowed to grow, then he would definitely bring calamity to the Sword Martial sect. Especially now that the Sword Martial sect had become mortal enemies with Yi Xian. If he didn't eliminate Yi Xian now, then even he wouldn't be confident in his ability to kill Yi Xian in the near future. Yi Xian must die. Li Xinghe gazed at Yi Xian. His expression was calm, but he was slightly vigilant in his heart. He didn't dare underestimate this mysterious young man at all. He knew what happened to the Xianyuan clan. The sword aura Li Xinghe emanated grew stronger and stronger, and it even caused the space in the surroundings to warp and warp. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Miss Yan Jia." He just finished speaking when Yan Jia appeared in front of him. Yi Xian passed Yi Ling to Yan Jia. "Take her away." Yan Jia glanced at Yi Xian and nodded. She took Yi Ling and was about to leave when an expert of the Sword Martial sect obstructed her path. Yi Xian gazed at Li Xinghe. "I'm the one all of you want to kill." Li Xinghe shook his head. "Pull up the weeds by the roots. Pull up the weeds by the roots." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished. Hiss. A ray of sword light flashed through the battlefield. It was so swift that it instantly caused Yan Jia's expression to change drastically. At the instant that Li Xinghe attacked, Yi Xian suddenly charged forward, and then the executing heaven sword slashed forward. The executing heaven sword. He hadn't given it to Li Xinghe earlier, and Li Xinghe probably didn't want it because of the pagoda of grand desire. Yi Xian's sword slashed directly against the ray of light. Bang! The sword light shook violently, but it did not explode. On the contrary, Yi Xian was sent flying thousands of feet away. In the process of retreating, his body started to crack inch by inch. When he stopped, his body had already cracked into a spider web pattern. Li Xinghe hadn't held back at all. Li Xinghe glanced at the sword in his hand. At this moment, numerous cracks had appeared on the sword. After a moment of silence, Li Xinghe looked at the executing heaven sword in Yi Xian's hand and said in a low voice, "No wonder it's the founder's sacred sword." As he spoke, he frowned. "How did this sword fall into your hands?" How Xinghe was. Yi Xinghe couldn't even fight against Yi Xinghe. He didn't feel that he was weak this time. After all, Li Xinghe was someone who had cultivated for thousands or even 10,000 years. He didn't feel that he was weak this time. After all, Li Xinghe was someone who had cultivated for thousands or even 10,000 years. He'd relied on those two precious treasures to kill Yi Xinghe, and that was already very heaven-defying. Li Xinghe gazed at Yi Xian. He didn't speak, and the sword in his hands suddenly started trembling. A sharp howl of the sword reverberated through the sky. Everyone in the surroundings was looking at Li Xinghe, this senior expert of Sky-Earth world. If Yi Xian was able to instantly kill Li Xinghe with a single strike, then it wouldn't be heaven-defying, it would be abnormal. The aura of the sword emanating from Li Xinghe grew stronger and stronger, and the space in the surroundings started to ripple. Yi Xian gazed at Li Xinghe in silence. He couldn't defeat Li Xinghe. He was very well aware of his current strength, and he wouldn't be able to defeat Li Xinghe even if he utilized the executing heaven sword and the infinite sword. It wasn't that the executing heaven sword and the infinite sword were weak, but the difference in cultivation was too great. Even though the infinite sword could disregard cultivation, it didn't mean that it was invincible. Of course, he still had to fight even if he couldn't defeat Li Xinghe. Yi Xian tightened his grip on his sword, and the executing heaven sword trembled violently. Li Xinghe gazed at Yi Xian and was about to attack. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly gazed at Yan Jia. "Is she all right?" Yan Jia naturally knew who Yi Xian was talking about. She gazed at Yi Ling, and then she shook her head a short while later. She's just fallen into a deep slumber. She's fine. Yi Xian nodded slightly, and then he gazed at Li Xinghe. Let's have a chat. Li Xinghe was slightly stunned, and so was everyone else here. Talk. Talk about what? Li Xinghe gazed at Yi Xian. What do you want to talk about? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, I'll let all of you go if you let me and my younger sister go. All of them were speechless. Li Xinghe gazed at Yi Xian. Are you joking with me? Yi Xian gazed at Li Xinghe. Do you really think that I only have the fifth dimensional treasure as my trump card? Li Xinghe's eyes narrowed slightly. He naturally didn't believe that Yi Xian only had the fifth dimensional treasure as his trump card. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so fearful of Yi Xian. Fearful. He was fearful of Yi Xian. Yi Xian had brought a fifth dimensional treasure with him all the way here, and that was already slightly heaven-defying. Moreover, who didn't know that Yi Xian had an extraordinary swordsman behind him? The woman in a plain dress. Who in the black-yellow great world wouldn't be fearful of her? She'd instantly annihilated the king of the northern region with a single strike of her sword and all the experts above the emperor realm in the north with a single strike of her sword. No one wouldn't be fearful of such strength. Even Li Xinghe was incomparably fearful of the woman in a plain dress. If not for the fact that the fifth dimensional treasure and the sacred sword were too important to him, he wouldn't be willing to make an enemy out of such an expert. Retracting his thoughts, Li Xinghe looked at Yi Xian. If you have any trump cards, feel free to show them. Yi Xian looked at Li Xinghe. Are you sure? Li Xinghe stared at Yi Xian. I'm sure. As soon as he finished speaking, he gently twisted his wrist and pointed his long sword diagonally to the ground. A wisp of sword light flickered on the tip of the sword. Yi Xian suddenly said, Brother Emperor Dog, it's time for you to make your appearance. Hearing this, Li Xinghe frowned slightly and tightened his grip on the sword in his right hand. However, there was no reaction from the surroundings. Li Xinghe looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Brother Emperor Dog, it's time for you to come out. The surroundings were incomparably silent. There was still no reaction. Yi Xian's face sank. Don't toy with me. Meanwhile, Li Xinghe suddenly said, Yi Xian, are you joking with me? As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished on the spot. Hiss. The sound of something tearing resounded. Yi Xian was just about to attack when a colossus suddenly appeared in front of him. The Emperor Dog. Yi Xian was stunned when he saw the Emperor Dog. At this moment, the Emperor Dog was completely different from before. Not only was it almost 2 times larger than before, it even emanated a strand of violet light. Of course, the most important factor was its aura. At this moment, the Emperor Dog's aura was countless times stronger than before. As soon as the Emperor Dog appeared, it leaped up and slammed against Li Xinghe. Bang! This collision caused the space where Li Xinghe and the Emperor Dog resided to collapse. At the same time, Li Xinghe was pushed over 1 kilometer back while the Emperor Dog was pushed almost 300 m back as well. Yi Xian's expression changed slightly when he witnessed this scene. That Emperor Dog has actually become so strong? That white little fellow's violet energy was so formidable. At this moment, Yi Xian was slightly regretful. He regretted that he didn't get more violet energy from that little fellow. The Emperor Dog had a ferocious expression on its face as it stood before Yi Xian, and it emanated a ferocious aura. All the experts in the surroundings had extremely solemn expressions on their faces. Li Xinghe gazed at the Emperor Dog and spoke softly, a ferocious beast. As soon as he finished speaking, he shook his wrist. In an instant, an expanse of light surged out and instantly enveloped the Emperor Dog. Hiss! 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 The space where the Emperor Dog resided was instantly torn apart inch by inch. Yi Xian was just about to attack when a strand of formidable aura suddenly erupted from within the expanse of light. In the next moment, the light dispersed, but right at this moment, a strand of light slashed against the Emperor Dog. Bang! The emperor dog was instantly pushed 300 m back, and its body was covered in scars. It can break through my defenses. Yi Xian's face fell. Not far away, the emperor dog turned to look at Yi Xian and said angrily, "You son of a b****, this daddy found me such an opponent as soon as I came out of seclusion. Can you stop screwing me over?" Yi Xian was speechless. At this moment, Li Xinghe suddenly disappeared, but this time, his target was Yi Xian. Clearly, he still wanted to kill Yi Xian directly. At this moment, the emperor dog suddenly stood in front of Yi Xian and slapped at Yi Xian. This slap caused the space in front of it to collapse. Rumble. Li Xinghe was pushed back again, but the emperor dog didn't have it easy either. Cracks appeared all over its body. Li Xinghe's sword could break through its defenses. If it were any other Ascension Seal Realm expert, they might not be able to break through the emperor dog's defenses. However, Li Xinghe was different. This was a swordsman, and a top-notch swordsman at that. In front of Yi Xian, the emperor dog said solemnly, "Kid, think of a way." A way? Yi Xian fell silent. At this moment, Li Xinghe suddenly looked around and said softly, "Yi Xian, isn't that plain-dressed woman behind you going to come out yet?" Yi Xian looked at Li Xinghe. "You can look for her like the Northern Region King did. Look for the plain-dressed woman." Li Xinghe looked at Yi Xian. "Do you think I'm stupid? If the plain-dressed woman appeared, he would naturally have other methods to deal with her. If she didn't appear, that would naturally be the best. Look for her himself? Was there something wrong with his head?" Li Xinghe opened his palm and a sword appeared in it. He looked at Yi Xian and the sword in his hands spun rapidly. Soon, sword hums rang out in the surroundings. Li Xinghe looked at Yi Xian. "Yi Xian, I've always heard that you have many backers. Call one of them out." In front of Yi Xian, the emperor dog hurriedly said, "Kid, call." "Call?" Yi Xian fell silent for a moment, and then he said, "Xiao Linger, it's your turn to perform." As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Linger instantly appeared in front of him. After Xiao Linger appeared, she looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, "Are you confident?" Xiao Linger blinked, and then she carefully took out a box. A box. The emperor dog's eyelids twitched when it saw this box. That day, Xiao Linger had taken out a box, and there was a white little fellow within the box. The reason it was able to break through the shackles of its bloodline was because of that little fellow. Is that little fellow going to appear again? Xiao Linger gazed at Li Xinghe who stood nearby. Li Xinghe chuckled, "Call quickly. I hope it's not too weak." Confidence. As one of the top swordsmen in this world, he was naturally confident. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Xiao Linger opened the box. A ray of black light suddenly drifted out. In midair, the black light dispersed, and a little girl appeared in front of everyone. The little girl wasn't tall, and her hair was tied up in a ponytail. She wore a snow-white shirt, and her arms were exposed. She wore a pair of blue pants, and there were a few holes at the knees. On her feet, she wore a pair of cloth shoes that were as white as snow. Something worthy of mentioning was that the little girl had a pair of horns on her head and a long tail behind her. The little girl had both her hands in her pockets, and there was a candied hawthorn in her mouth. Her right foot tapped lightly in a very rhythmic manner, and she was even humming an unknown tune. P.S. Thank you to all the friends who tipped and voted yesterday. Thank you for your support. Chapter 708. A little girl? Everyone was looking at the little girl. They hadn't expected that Yi Xian would actually call a little girl out. The little girl was completely devoid of aura, and she seemed like an ordinary person. However, the emperor hound by Yi Xian's side had an unprecedentedly solemn expression on its face. Tremble. Its body was trembling. Yi Xian gazed at the emperor hound while feeling extremely shocked in his heart. This little girl actually made the emperor hound afraid? He knew about the emperor hound. It was an extraordinary ferocious beast, and coupled with the fact that it had broken through the shackles of its bloodline, it could be said to be at the top amongst ferocious beasts. However, it was actually afraid of the little girl at this moment. Based on her outward appearance, it was very likely that she was a demon beast. In other words, it was very likely that she was a ferocious beast as well. So, exactly what sort of demon beast could make even the emperor hound fear her? Yi Xian gazed at the little girl in the distance. The little girl's eyes opened slowly, and her pupils were pitch black while she seemed quite carefree. Li Xinghe's eyes were filled with a solemn expression as he gazed at the little girl. The little girl was completely devoid of aura, and she seemed like an ordinary person. That was exactly why she was even more terrifying. Li Xinghe held his sword tightly, and no one knew what he was thinking. The little girl glanced at the surroundings, and then she said softly, "Is this the sword sect?" The sword sect? Yi Xian was slightly stunned, but it didn't take long for him to come to an understanding. It was probably the same box that he'd found in the sword sect. Meanwhile, the little girl turned around to gaze at Xiao Linger, and Xiao Linger hurriedly withdrew a candied fruit and passed it to the little girl. The little girl received it in a very natural manner, and then she gazed at Xiao Linger. "You called me out?" Xiao Linger hurriedly nodded. The little girl sized up the little girl and said, "Do you want to fight?" Xiao Linger immediately pointed at Li Xinghe, who stood nearby. The little girl turned around to look at Li Xinghe, and then she sized him up. "So weak? So weak?" Everyone here was dumbstruck. So weak? Is there something wrong with this little girl's head? Li Xinghe looked at the little girl. "You think I'm weak?" The little girl thought for a moment and said, "Let me correct you. You're not weak, you're very weak." Everyone, Li Xinghe suddenly laughed. "After so many years, this is the first time someone has called me weak. Furthermore, it's just a clone." Right at this moment, the little girl suddenly appeared before Li Xinghe. Li Xinghe's pupils suddenly constricted. He suddenly drew his sword and stabbed. Buzz! A sword cry resounded, and a ray of sword light slashed toward the little girl. Under everyone's gaze, the little girl suddenly punched out. It was a simple punch. Boom! Everyone watched as Li Xinghe's ray of light instantly vanished without a trace. At the same time, Li Xinghe's figure appeared over 3 kilometers away, and the space before the little girl's eyes was pitch black. At this moment, everyone in the surroundings was petrified. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched, and his heart raced. Where did this monster come from? In the distance, Li Xinghe was only left with his spirit. Furthermore, his spirit was rapidly fading away. Li Xinghe's gaze was slightly dazed. The little girl licked her sugar-coated paws and spoke emotionlessly. "Can't you just admit that you're weak? Why do you have to go against me?" Li Xinghe gazed at the little girl. "Who exactly are you?" "Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian lacks talent and virtue. From this moment onward, Yi Xian is removed from the position of prince and will be succeeded by Yi Lang." It was an old man in black robes who spoke these words. A young man stood not too far away from the old man, and he had a faint smile on the corners of his mouth. It was Yi Lang. On the other hand, the elders of the Yi clan stood on both sides. "Why?" Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan was going to remove Yi Xian from his position, she had rushed over despite her illness. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The little girl called Yi Ling bowed slightly to everyone in the ancestral hall and spoke timidly. "Grand Elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The Grand Elder looked coldly at Yi Ling. "This is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the great elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, "Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. Impudent." The grand elder suddenly raged. "Whether or not he is crippled, it is not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. "You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The grand elder replied coldly, "Then do it 30 times. Very quickly, 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years. Even now, he is still fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of prince. What are you yelling about?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap was heard. Yi Ling's right cheek instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry. She only held her cheek tightly. Yi Long sized up the guard and asked with a smile, "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince." Yi Lang nodded, "You are very good. After I become the prince, I will need 10 guards. From now on, you will be my guard." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He quickly bowed deeply. "This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the prince." Yi Lang nodded slightly. "Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Do not hold back." "Understood." Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes. His face was dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt dizzy, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there. He rushed towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you?" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's entire face was a bloody mess. As he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, who was crying for help. He walked up to Yi Ling. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt like his heart was being sliced apart. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors above, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? At this time, a timid voice rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling. What are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall, and asked timidly, Great Elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. This is a matter of the clan, what are you interrupting for? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid, and did not dare to look at the Great Elder. However, she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. Once again, she bowed to the elders. Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan for the rights to the mine. He is fighting for the clan, and his life is uncertain. But now, the clan is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged. Whether or not he is crippled, it is not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly, then flog 30 times. Very quickly, two Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he is fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, Young Master Yi Lang inherits the position of prince. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and Yi Ling's right cheek instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry, and only covered her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard, and smiled, What's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed. Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded, You are very good. After I become the prince, I will need 10 guards. From now on, you will be my guard. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and quickly bowed deeply. I will go through fire and water for the prince, and I will do anything for you. Yi Lang nodded, Drag him out. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Do not hold back, understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. Inside the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside the hall. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe, and the robe was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt his head spin, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and rushed towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 709. At this moment, Yi Xian and the Emperor Hound suddenly realized how important this candied hall was. Very important. Xiao Linger. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian, the Emperor Hound, and Yanjia suddenly looked at Xiao Linger. This little fellow must not be offended. They could not afford to offend her. Xiao Linger suddenly looked at Yi Xian. "I still have a box." With that, a box suddenly appeared in front of her. A box. At the side, the Emperor Hound's mouth twitched. Yi Xian walked in front of Xiao Linger and said seriously, "This box cannot be used carelessly, understand?" Xiao Linger nodded. "Use it when it's dangerous." Yi Xian gently rubbed Xiao Linger's little head. "Yes, use it when it's dangerous." Xiao Linger slightly lowered her head. "I only have one box." "Only one box." Yi Xian smiled. "You can't bear to use it?" Xiao Linger looked at Yi Xian. "Will we be able to see her in the future?" Yi Xian asked. "The little fellow who gave you the box?" Xiao Linger nodded. Yi Xian smiled. "We will definitely see her." Xiao Linger grinned. "Good." With that, she carried the box back into the prison pagoda. Yi Xian pondered for a moment, then looked at the Emperor Hound. The Emperor Hound said solemnly, "I want to go into seclusion." Yi Xian's mouth twitched. "Emperor Hound, how long will you be in seclusion this time?" The Emperor Hound shook its head. "I don't know." Yi Xian hesitated, then said, "Can you hurry up? I'm in a bit of danger now." The Emperor Hound glanced at Yi Xian. "When are you not in danger?" Yi Xian was speechless. After the Emperor Dog returned to the prison pagoda, Yi Xian walked in front of Yanjia. He looked at Yi Ling, who was in Yanjia's arms, with an extremely gloomy expression. Yanga looked at Yi Xian. "Let's go back first." Yi Xian fell silent for a moment, and then he nodded. He carried Yi Ling in his arms and vanished with Yanjia. His sister was the most important. After Yi Xian and the others left, the scene returned to calm. In the dark, Xianyuan Qi looked in the direction they left and said softly, "Martial Master, do you recognize the little girl just now?" Beside her, Xianyuan Wu shook his head. "I've never seen him before." Xianyuan Qi remained silent for a long time before she said, "Exactly how many backers does he have?" "A backer." Xianyuan Wu fell silent. Just now, that little girl had killed Li Xinghe, who was already at the Ascended Seal realm, with a single punch. Who was Li Xinghe? He was from the same generation as Xianyuan Wu, and Li Xinghe's ranking on the sovereign rankings all those years ago was above Xianyuan Wu. However, Li Xinghe wasn't just at the Ascended Seal realm, he was also an extraordinary swordsman. His combat strength could absolutely be ranked in the top 5 amongst Ascended Seal realm experts. However, such an extraordinary expert had been instantly killed by a single punch from that little girl. It was an instant kill. He didn't even have the ability to fight back. First, it was the woman in a plain dress, and now it was that strange little girl. If the founding ancestor of the Immortal Sword sect was included, then it meant that Yi Xian had 3 extraordinary experts backing him. Each of them was more heaven-defying than the last. The problem was, did Yi Xian have any other backers besides the 3 of them? Xianyuan Wu fell silent for a very long time. In the end, he said softly, "Little girl, hide yourself for now." Xianyuan Qi gazed at Xianyuan Wu, and the latter said in a low voice, "That person is a vengeful person. He might not let you off, and he might not even let my Xianyuan family off." Xianyuan Qi fell silent. Xianyuan Wu said softly, "I'll go see the patriarch." Xianyuan Qi suddenly said, "He'll definitely take revenge. Not just us, but the sword martial sect as well." Xianyuan Wu looked at Xianyuan Qi. Xianyuan Qi said in a low voice, "We can't let him take revenge on us first." Xianyuan Wu shook his head. "He probably hates my Xianyuan family the most." Xianyuan Qi said, "No, he probably hates the person who's manipulating everything in the dark the most." Manipulating everything in the dark. Xianyuan Wu narrowed his eyes with killing intent. Not only did this person set up my Xianyuan family, but he also set up the sword martial sect. Who exactly is it? Xianyuan Qi said in a low voice, "I've already asked Skynet to investigate. I believe we'll have news soon." Skynet. Xianyuan Wu nodded. "We must find out as soon as possible." Xianyuan Qi's expression was gloomy. "I also want to know who's behind all of this." News of what Yi Xian had done in the sword martial sect soon spread throughout the Black Origin Great World. Yi Xian. Almost everyone in the Black Origin Great World knew the name Yi Xian. He had many backers. That was everyone's impression of Yi Xian. Not only did he have many backers, but his backers were also very powerful. Now, everyone was very curious about Yi Xian's background. Why did Yi Xian have so many backers? Why? Countless forces were curious. In fact, even the people of the northern region were curious, let alone the other forces. And Lanxiu and the others were very familiar with Yi Xian, but they did not know why Yi Xian had so many backers. For example, they could not understand why the ancestral master of the Immortal Sword sect would help Yi Xian. Of course, that was not the main point. The main point was that the Xianyuan family had been severely damaged, the sword martial sect's ancestral master had fallen, and the Immortal Sword sect master had become Yi Xian, Northern Region, Prison Tower. Yi Xian looked at Yi Ling in front of him quietly. At this moment, pure spiritual energy was exuding from Yi Ling's body. About 2 hours later, Yi Ling slowly opened his eyes. The moment he saw Yi Xian, Yi Ling smiled. Yi Xian also smiled. But as he smiled, he began to cry. His tears flowed uncontrollably. No one knew what Yi Ling meant to Yi Xian. Everything. His little sister was his everything. When he was very, very young, when his mother had just left, that was the most difficult time for him. If it was not for his little sister, he would not have been able to persevere. Because that time was really too bitter. But whenever he saw his little sister, he would tell himself that he could not die. If he died, his little sister would have no one to rely on. He did not dare to imagine what would happen to his little sister if he died. At that time, his little sister was his belief. For his little sister, no matter how bitter, tiring, or difficult it was, he would persist on living. Because he was alive, his little sister could live. He never dared to think about what would happen if he lost his little sister. At the side, Yanjia looked at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. This was the first time she had seen Yi Xian cry. Cry. It was hard to imagine that a person like Yi Xian would cry. Because in her impression, Yi Xian was someone who was very decisive in killing, and could even be said to be somewhat cruel. This kind of person usually did not care much about feelings, or rather, had no feelings at all. But Yi Xian cared so much about his little sister. Even more than his own life. She did not doubt that Yi Xian would really die for Yi Ling. For Yi Ling, he could really do anything, including die. At this moment, Yi Ling suddenly said, "Brother. Did I drag you down again?" Yi Xian gently rubbed Yi Ling's little head. "It's not that you dragged me down, it's that I couldn't protect you." Yi Ling looked at Yi Xian. "If it wasn't for me, brother, Yi Xian suddenly said, "without you, life is meaningless to me." Yi Ling looked at Yi Xian, and tears flowed from her eyes. Yi Xian gently wiped the tears off Yi Ling's face. "We have to live well. You bully others, but if anyone dares to bully us, brother will make them die a horrible death. Rest well, brother has something to do." After saying this, he got up and left the prison pagoda. Within the pagoda, Yi Ling was silent, and no one knew what she was thinking. Yanjie suddenly said, "His enemies will become stronger and stronger." Yi Ling nodded, "I know." As she said this, she looked at Yanjie. "I can still become stronger, right?" Yanjie smiled, "Of course. Are you interested in Dao Law?" Yi Ling looked at Yanjie, and Yanjie smiled. "One ice and one fire, it should be fun." In the hall, Yi Xian sat calmly, and no one could tell that he was angry. In front of him were Jiang Jiu and Shangguan Xian. Yi Xian said, "Investigate who is behind this." Shangguan Xian said, "I just received a secret report." Yi Xian looked at Shangguan Xian, and she said, "There are 3 names in the report. The first is Dao Sect, the second is Bound of Universe, and the third is Wu Clan." Yi Xian was silent. Shangguan Xian, continued, "I do not know who sent this secret memorial, but at the moment, the only ones who have the ability to do so, and the motive to do so, are these 3 families." Yi Xian was silent. Shangguan Xian hesitated, and then said, "The waters of Bound of Universe are very deep. No matter what your majesty wants to do, you must be very careful." Of course, she knew Yi Xian would not let it go so easily. If the other party had only attacked Yi Xian might have tolerated it for a while. However, if they had attacked Yi Ling, then they would not stop until one of them died. It should be said that whether it was Sword Martial Sect or Xianyuan clan, Yi Xian would definitely not let them go. And now, it was a matter of time. Yi Xian nodded, "I understand, you can leave first." Shangguan Xian nodded, and then left. Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian, "Don't be too impulsive." Yi Xian nodded, "I won't do anything rash. One can only take revenge if he is alive." Jiang Jiu nodded, "It's good that you understand." Saying this, she hesitated, and then said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you too much." Yi Xian looked at Jiang Jiu, "Without you and Shangguan Xian, I wouldn't be able to manage the northern region. You 2 are my good wives." "Good wives?" Jiang Jiu rolled his eyes at Yi Xian. "Are you taking advantage of me?" Yi Xian said softly, "Actually, I'm a little afraid that I'll implicate you too." Jiang Jiu shook her head, "Without you, everyone in the chaotic universe would be dead. Remember, you don't owe us, and you don't owe anyone." Yi Xian was silent. Jiang Jiu said, "Don't let yourself live too hard." Saying this, she glanced at Yi Xian. "Rest well, Xian, and I will go investigate and see if we can find the person behind this." Saying this, she turned and left. In the hall, Yi Xian was silent for a long time. Finally, he opened his palm, and within it was a drop of blood essence. That mysterious little girl's blood essence. A moment later, Yi Xian directly swallowed that drop of blood essence. In an instant, Yi Xian's entire body began to burn. P.S. Ticket. Do you have it? Chapter 710. Burn. After Yi Xian consumed that drop of essence blood, his entire face contorted. Pain. At that moment, he felt as if his entire body was being corroded by a mysterious power. It was a heart-wrenching pain. Yi Xian hurriedly took out a large pile of raw crystals and started devouring them. Not only that, but he also devoured all sorts of healing pills. At that moment, Yanjie appeared in front of Yi Xian. She frowned slightly as she looked at Yi Xian's body. Yi Xian's body was being destroyed. Moreover, the rate of recovery was far inferior to the destruction caused by that drop of essence blood. Yinjia's expression darkened. Yi Xian had been too impulsive this time. He had underestimated the energy contained within that drop of essence blood. Let alone Yi Xian, even she had underestimated that drop of essence blood. The blood-red flames around Yi Xian grew stronger and stronger, and Yi Xian's body started to turn illusory. Even a god-level body could not withstand it. As if she had thought of something, Yinjia hurriedly said, "Hurry up and activate your bloodline. Let your bloodline suppress it." The power of bloodline. Hearing this, Yi Xian hurriedly activated his bloodline. Very soon, his blood began to boil. Boom! A powerful force suddenly rippled out from his body, and Yanja, who was in front of him, was immediately forced to retreat. After Yanja stopped, she hurriedly looked at Yi Xian. However, when she saw Yi Xian, she was stunned. Yi Xian's blood did not suppress that drop of essence blood. On the contrary, they were getting along very harmoniously. Yi Xian was also stunned. In the past, whenever he encountered other bloodlines, his bloodline would definitely madly devour them. However, at that moment, his bloodline was getting along very well with that drop of essence blood. What was going on? At that moment, that drop of essence blood suddenly started to fuse with his blood. Yi Xian, when that drop of essence blood actively fused with his blood, his body gradually started to transform. Sensing this, Yi Xian heaved a sigh of relief. Yinjia also relaxed. It had to be said that it was too dangerous just now. However, what she did not understand was why that drop of essence blood would choose to fuse with Yi Xian's blood. Time passed bit by bit. Inside the pagoda, Yi Xian's aura was getting stronger and stronger, and his body was slowly squirming. It was incomparably strange. Apart from Yi Xian, the body of the emperor dog on the second floor was also changing. It had also devoured that drop of blood essence. After swallowing that drop of essence blood, dark scales started to appear all over its body. On the fifth floor, Xiao Linger was currently watering the spirit trees. Currently, the entire prison pagoda, from the first to the seventh floor, was filled with all sorts of spirit trees. After a while, Xiao Linger clapped his hands, turned around, and left. After walking around, she finally arrived at the entrance to the 8th floor. The door of the 8th floor was not quite the same as the other floors. The door of the 8th floor was blood red, and there was a deep sword mark on it. Xiao Linger looked at the door and fell into deep thought. No one knew what she was thinking about. After a while, little Linger suddenly approached the door of the tower. She looked inside through the sword mark, and a moment later, she seemed to have seen something terrifying, and immediately retreated in fear. Xiao Linger held the woman's sword with both hands and pointed at the door. Her voice trembled as she said, "You don't scare me." At this moment, the door of the pagoda trembled slightly. Xiao Linger's entire body trembled. Green City, Yi Family, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent and no virtue. From this moment onwards, Yi Xian's position as crown prince will be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man dressed in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the elders of the Yi residence. Why? At this time, a timid voice rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was to be replaced, she ignored her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The girl called Yi Ling bowed to everyone in the ancestral hall, and asked timidly, "Great elder, my brother Yi Xian is the crown prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The great elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. "This is a family matter. What are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was obviously afraid, not daring to look at the great elder, but she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and entered the ancestral hall. Once again, she bowed to the elders. Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li family over the mining rights at Nanshan Hill. He is fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is dead or alive. Yet, the family is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is unfair. Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged. Whether he is stripped of his position or not, it is not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new crown prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The great elder coldly replied, then do it 30 times. Very quickly, 2 guards of the Yi residence rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, this is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the family for so many years, and even now, he is fighting for the family. The family is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince, Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, young master Yi Lang inherits the title of crown prince, and it is everyone's wish. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard, and smiled, what's your name? The guard quickly bowed, this subordinate, Zhang Mu, greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded, you are very good. After I become the crown prince, I will need 10 personal guards. From now on, you will be my personal guard. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and quickly bowed deeply. This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the crown prince, and I am willing to die 10,000 times. Yi Lang nodded, drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall, do not hold back. Understood. Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the killing intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this time, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and he suddenly stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Within the ancestral hall, all the elders began to frown. The great elder narrowed his eyes, and his expression was frighteningly dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his expression turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his expression changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's expression turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, your man? As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked up to Yi Ling. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced apart. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed out, brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors above, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the Yi clan elders. Why? Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to everyone in the hall, as she asked timidly, Great Elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. This is a family matter, what are you butting in for? Leave. Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. This is truly unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged. Whether or not he is crippled, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly, then do it 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he is fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, Young Master Yi Lang inherits the position of prince. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry, and only covered her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard, and smiled, What's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed. Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded, You're not bad. After I become the prince, I will need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and quickly bowed deeply. I will go through fire and water for the prince, and I will do anything for you. Yi Lang nodded, Drag him out. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Do not hold back, understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe, and the robe was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 711. Yinjia left the prison pagoda with Yi Ling looking for Dao laws. In fact, Yinjia and Yu had this idea before. Because Yi Xian was not in a very good situation at the moment. Although he had the woman in a plain dress behind him, the woman in a plain dress could not show up all the time. If Yi Xian died, it would be very disadvantageous for her and Yu. Because only Yi Xian could control the prison pagoda. Of course, the reason why he could control it was because of the plain-dressed woman inside the pagoda. Yi Xian pondered for a long time. In the end, he left the prison pagoda. Divine Hall. Shangguan Xian came to Yi Xian. Yi Xian asked, "How is the investigation going?" Shangguan Xian said solemnly, "I received a few more secret memorials, which detailed the motives of the Dao sect, Wu clan, and the Master of Heaven and Earth." Yi Xian looked at Shangguan Xian, "Who do you think it is?" Shangguan Xian said solemnly, "It is possible, but the Master of Heaven and Earth is most likely." Yi Xian asked, "Why?" Shangguan Xian said, "Because the chaos in the Heaven and Earth realm is the most beneficial to her." Of course, I can't be sure because the Heaven and Earth realm has been silent for too long. On the surface, they are far inferior to the Xianyuan family and the sword martial sect in terms of strength and influence. Yi Xian was silent for a long time, and then he said, "I will go to the Xianyuan family." With that, he disappeared. Shangguan Xian sighed softly. She knew that Yi Xian was still unwilling to let the Xianyuan family off. It could not be helped, the Xianyuan family really should not have touched Yi Ling. This was what Yi Xian could not tolerate the most. Yi Xian did not go directly to the Xianyuan family. Instead, he went to the Heaven and Earth realm. In the Heaven and Earth palace, Yi Xian looked at the Master of Heaven and Earth in front of him. "Is it you?" The old man next to the Lord of Heaven and Earth stared at Yi Xian, his eyes filled with caution. The Master of Mysterious Yellow naturally knew what Yi Xian meant. She smiled and said, "It wasn't me." Yi Xian looked straight at the Lord of Heaven and Earth. His right hand was already holding onto the sword at his waist. At that moment, the old man beside the Master of Heaven and Yellow stood in front of Yi Xian. At that moment, the Master of Mysterious Yellow suddenly said, "Why do you think it's me?" Yi Xian looked at the Lord of Heaven and Earth without saying a word. The Master of Mysterious Yellow smiled. "Did someone tell you that I was the one who took your sister away?" Yi Xian suddenly walked towards the Lord of Heaven and Earth. The old man in front of her squinted his eyes and clenched his right hand tightly. A powerful aura emanated from his body. Half-step seal ascension stage. At the same time, 4 men in black suddenly appeared not far behind Yi Xian. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. The 4 of them were all peak end realm experts. The Master of Heaven and Earth suddenly waved his right hand. The 4 men in black stopped and then disappeared. However, the old man in front of the Master of Heaven and Earth didn't move. The Master of Heaven and Earth smiled. "Old Yang, you can't stop him." Old Yang looked at Yi Xian. "The one who took your sister away wasn't His Majesty." Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. Old Master Yang's expression changed drastically in an instant, and he suddenly punched forward. Hong! The moment old Yang punched out, a strong force instantly sent him flying. When he stopped, Yi Xian's sword was already on the Master of Heaven and Earth's brow. Old Yang was shocked. Yi Xian, if you touch her, you will definitely die. Yi Xian looked at the Master of Heaven and Earth in front of him. How can I trust you? The Master of Heaven and Earth smiled. I know who took your sister away. As soon as she finished speaking, she waved her right hand. A light screen suddenly appeared not far in front of Yi Xian. In the light screen, Xianyuan Qi and an expert from the Xianyuan family were on their way back to the Xianyuan family. In Xianyuan Qi's hand was Yi Ling. At this moment, something strange happened. A shadow suddenly rushed toward Xianyuan Qi and the expert. Xianyuan Qi and the expert's expressions changed. They were about to attack, but at this moment, the black shadow disappeared. Yi Ling disappeared with it. Seeing Yi Ling disappear, Xianyuan Qi and the expert's expressions became extremely ugly. At this moment, the scene suddenly stopped. Yi Xian looked at the Master of Heaven and Earth. The Master of Heaven and Earth smiled. Continue watching. Yi Xian looked at the light screen. In the light screen, the man in black disappeared and was brought to a cloud. In the cloud, an old man in white stood. The old man was dressed in white, and his hands were behind his back. His back was facing the man in black, so his face could not be seen clearly. The man in black bowed slightly to the old man. No one knew what he was saying. After a while, the man in black turned around and left with Yi Ling. At this moment, the white-robed old man suddenly turned around. His eyes were like sharp blades, causing people to shiver. It was also at this moment that the scene came to an abrupt end. The hall fell silent. Yi Xian looked at the Master of Heaven and Earth. Who are those two? The Master of Heaven and Earth shook his head. I don't know. Yi Xian frowned slightly. The Master of Heaven and Earth suddenly asked, Do you really understand the black-yellow great world? Yi Xian said in a low voice, What do you mean? The Master of Heaven and Earth smiled. Do you know? The black-yellow great world is huge. Not only is it huge, but the waters here are also very deep. Even when the black-yellow world was at its peak, it did not really unify the entire black-yellow great world. Some forces are out in the open, while some forces are not known to people. Do you understand? Yi Xian looked at the Master of Heaven and Earth. This chapter is not over. Please continue. The Master of Heaven and Earth said, You should know who they are. The Master of Heaven and Earth fell silent. Yi Xian did not ask any more questions. He turned around and left. The Master of Heaven and Earth looked at Yi Xian and did not speak. Soon, Yi Xian disappeared from the hall. Seeing this, the old man beside the Master of Heaven and Earth heaved a sigh of relief. The current Yi Xian was too terrifying. He was even more terrifying than before. The Master of Heaven and Earth suddenly said, He has become stronger again. Old Yang looked at the Master of Heaven and Earth. What level is he at now? The Master of Heaven and Earth shook his head. I don't know the specifics. As she spoke, she raised her head and looked outside the hall in the distance. She whispered, He is really a monster. Old Yang sighed. This time, the Xianyuan family may be in trouble. The Master of Heaven and Earth said with a smile, Don't underestimate the Xianyuan family or the Sword Martial sect. Of course, don't underestimate our King Yi. The Night King's backers are really stronger than the other. Old Yang said in a deep voice, Who is that mysterious little girl from before? The Master of Heaven and Earth shook his head. Our people can't find out. Including the woman in the plain dress. These people seem to have suddenly appeared. Old Yang asked, Can you calculate it? The Master of Heaven and Earth said softly, Whoever calculates it will die. Old Yang was speechless. The master of heaven and earth suddenly laughed. Let's see who is stronger, Yi Xian or the Xianyuan family. An hour later, Yi Xian arrived in the Xianyuan world. As soon as he appeared, Xianyuan Wu appeared in front of him. Xianyuan Wu looked at Yi Xian and did not speak. Yi Xian closed his eyes. Let her out. Xianyuan Wu narrowed his eyes. Yi Xian, do you really want to fight to the death? Yi Xian roared. Let her out. Xianyuan Wu was about to speak when a woman appeared in front of Yi Xian. It was Xianyuan Qi. Seeing Xianyuan Qi, Xianyuan Wu's face changed. You. Go back. Xianyuan Qi shook her head and looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, I took your sister. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. The next moment, a sword pierced through Xianyuan Qi's forehead. Qi. Xianyuan Qi froze on the spot. Meanwhile, Xianyuan Wu was stunned. Yi Xian turned and looked at Xianyuan Qi with a ferocious expression. Those who hurt my sister, die. 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 P.S. Asking for tickets. If you don't have tickets, praise me. End of this chapter. Chapter 712. Xianyuan Qi's eyes were glazed over. She had never thought that she would die like this. This time, Yi Xian's sword had not only destroyed her body, but it had also destroyed her soul. Her soul was disappearing at an extremely fast speed. She knew that she was definitely going to die. A bitter smile appeared on Xianyuan Qi's lips as she recalled the past. In the end, Xianyuan Qi's eyes lost all color. She was completely dead. Yi Xian. Xianyuan Wu suddenly roared nearby. You're going too far. He charged forward as soon as he finished his words. Boom. A powerful aura swept across the battlefield like a storm. Nearby, Yi Xian was expressionless as he drew his sword and slashed. Qi. A sword light instantly tore the space in front of him. Boom. The two separated as soon as they collided. Yi Xian retreated hundreds of meters while Xianyuan Wu retreated less than 300 meters. However, Xianyuan Wu's expression was extremely grim as he glared at Yi Xian. You've become stronger again. He had become stronger again. Yi Xian's current strength was not just a little bit stronger than before. How long had it been this time? Xianyuan Wu was extremely shocked, but he was filled with killing intent. Xianyuan Wu knew very well that there was no way the Xianyuan family and Yi Xian could reconcile. Unless the Xianyuan family admitted defeat and sacrificed their dignity to admit their mistakes, there would only be a possibility of reconciliation. However, would the Xianyuan family do that? As the saying went, a warrior would rather be killed than humiliated. The Xianyuan family was an ancient family after all. They would never lower their heads and admit their mistakes to Yi Xian. Would Yi Xian let the Xianyuan family off? Definitely not. He had already become sworn enemies with the Xianyuan family the moment they laid their hands on Yi Ling. Xianyuan Wu looked at Yi Xian and slowly clenched his right hand. A powerful force gathered in his hand and the space around him began to tremble violently. Not far away, Yi Xian was expressionless. He gripped his sword tightly in his right hand, and a powerful sword aura suddenly rippled out from his body. Xianyuan Wu's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene, and he immediately retreated an entire 3 kilometers back. Sword skill. He knew that Yi Xian was going to use that powerful sword technique again. There were two things about Yi Xian that he feared the most. The first was the 5th-dimensional treasure, and the second was that powerful sword skill. That powerful sword skill was completely capable of killing a sealed realm expert like him. Seeing that Xianyuan Wu had retreated, Yi Xian didn't attack again. Instead, he turned around and left. If this kind of ascended seal realm expert were to avoid battle, even his limitless sword would not be able to do anything to him. Xianyuan Wu's expression was terrifyingly gloomy when he saw Yi Xian leaving. He didn't dare to chase after Yi Xian either. If Yi Xian wanted to leave now, even a crescent stage expert wouldn't dare to force him to stay. That sword. He wasn't confident that he could withstand it. At this moment, Xian Yuanwu suddenly turned around. The space in front of him suddenly trembled. A moment later, he narrowed his eyes slightly. Yi Xian, let's see how long you can jump around. As soon as he finished speaking, he disappeared. After Yi Xian left the Xianyuan family, he directly went to the sword martial world. Some debts naturally had to be settled. However, when he arrived at the sword martial world, it was currently enveloped by a large formation. Looking at the formation in front of him, Yi Xian drew his sword and slashed. Pust. The entire formation shook violently when the sword fell, but it wasn't damaged at all. Yi Xian frowned. He drew the executing heaven sword and slashed again. Boom! The formation shook violently. A deep crack appeared where his sword fell, but it instantly returned to normal. Yi Xian slashed several more times, but he still couldn't break the formation. In the end, he used the Space Dao Law, but this time, the Space Dao Law couldn't let him enter. This was because the location of the formation had even sealed the space. Moreover, there were many strange runes in the space. In front of the formation, Yi Xian was silent for a long time. In the end, he finally turned around and left. The formation of such an ancient force couldn't be broken easily. In the sword martial world, the expressions of Zhang Qi and Gu Jing instantly relaxed when they saw Yi Xian leave. They knew that Yi Xian might come for revenge, so they had long activated the formation. Fortunately, the formation was activated. Otherwise, if Yi Xian came in, at this moment, Zhang Qi suddenly said, "Did the patriarch make any movements?" Gu Jing said softly, "The patriarch left 2 hours ago." Zhang Qi looked at Gu Jing. "Where did he go?" Gu Jing said, "The Xianyuan family. Join forces." Zhang Qi said in a deep voice, "It shouldn't be just us, right?" Gu Jing nodded. "Of course it's not just us." As he spoke, he lifted his head to look at the distant horizon and said softly, "This time, the forces of the Black-Yellow Great World will fight against Yi Xian and the person behind him." After Yi Xian left the sword martial school, he returned to the Black Origin world again. In the Black Origin Palace, Yi Xian looked at the Lord of Black Origin. "Do you know about the sect?" "The Dao sect." The Lord of Black Origin nodded. "I know about Dao Yi." Yi Xian looked at the Lord of Black Origin without saying anything. The Lord of Black Origin said softly, "This is a mysterious force. It's very mysterious." Then, she looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, "King Yi, are you here to ask me or to threaten me?" Yi Xian walked in front of the Lord of Black Origin. "You were involved in my sister's matter, right?" The Lord of Black Origin nodded. "Yes." Yi Xian looked at the Lord of Black Origin. "Next time, if you have any schemes, come at me. Don't have any ideas about my sister. Do you understand?" The Lord of Black Origin looked at Yi Xian. "The more you care about her, the more dangerous her situation will be." Yi Xian nodded. "I know." The Lord of Black Origin smiled. "She is your weakness. Many people can't defeat you, so they will target her. Can you protect her for life?" Then, she walked in front of the palace and said softly, "King Yi, you are very strong, and your backer is very strong. However, don't underestimate the Black Origin world. Take the Xianyuan family for example. Do you think they are only at the ascending Feng realm? Their foundation is so deep that you can't imagine it." Yi Xian looked at the Lord of Black Origin. "What about the Black Origin world? How deep is it?" The Lord of Black Origin turned to look at Yi Xian. "King Yi, you and I have no conflict of interest. Many people want you dead, but I don't want you to die. If you are alive, you will be more useful to me. Simply put, we can use each other." Yi Xian nodded. "You can use me. The problem is, what is your value to me?" The Lord of Black Origin smiled. "Intelligence." In terms of intelligence, if the Black Origin world says it is second, no one dares to say they are first. Yi Xian looked at the Lord of Black Origin for a long time. Then, he said, "Deal." The Lord of Black Origin looked at Yi Xian and said, "The Tao sect is a very mysterious force. They are mysterious because they don't participate in worldly battles and don't expand. They have almost no presence." Then, she looked at Yi Xian. "As far as I know, your god nation has a super genius, Shao Qi. She is now in the hands of the Tao sect, right?" Yi Xian nodded. The Lord of Black Origin said, "I don't have any more information about the Tao sect. However, let me give you a friendly reminder. Don't provoke this force. They are not simple." Yi Xian asked, "How can I find them?" The Lord of Black Origin opened her palm, and a white light landed in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian opened his palm, and the white light entered his brain. After a while, Yi Xian turned around and left. The Lord of Black Origin watched Yi Xian leave and said softly, "This guy. Is he going to cause trouble for the Tao sect?" Old Yang was speechless. After Yi Xian left the Black Origin world, he traveled west on his sword. After about 2 hours, he came to a wasteland. Yi Xian stopped. At the end of his vision, there was a wasteland. It was desolate, and there was a scorching air. What was this place? Yi Xian frowned. After a while, he turned into a sword light and disappeared. In just a moment, Yi Xian stopped. 1,000 feet in front of him, there was a stone city. The city was a little old, like it belonged to a primitive society. Yi Xian was about to head over when an old man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. When he saw this old man, Yi Xian was stunned. He knew this person. It was the old man who helped him improve in the chaotic universe. An old acquaintance. The old man sized up Yi Xian, and his eyes were filled with shock. "Peak End Realm physical body?" Yi Xian nodded, "I just broke through." The old man said solemnly, "Is it that girl's essence blood?" Yi Xian nodded and looked at the old man. "Senior is paying attention too?" The old man nodded. "You caused too much of a commotion." Yi Xian said solemnly, "Senior, my sister." The old man smiled. "I know what you want to ask. Don't worry, we didn't attack your sister." Yi Xian nodded. "That's good." Honestly speaking, he didn't want to be enemies with the Taoist faction because Seven was there. Moreover, this Taoist faction was really mysterious and they were definitely really strong. At this moment, the old man suddenly said, "However, we know who took your sister away." Yi Xian looked at the old man and the old man said, "Follow me." After saying this, he turned around and walked into the distance. Yi Xian followed. On the way, the old man said, "How did you find this place?" Yi Xian said, "Xianhuang Lord." The old man said softly, "That woman." Yi Xian asked, "Why?" The old man said, "That woman isn't simple." "No, she isn't simple at all. You have to be careful when dealing with her." "Xianhuang Lord." Yi Xian nodded. He was really wary of that woman. Instinct told him that she was dangerous. The old man continued, "Other than that, the Xianyuan family and the sword martial sect aren't simple either. Don't underestimate them. Moreover, they seem to be plotting something." Yi Xian asked, "Plotting what?" The old man nodded. "Their real experts haven't come out yet. The reason why they haven't come out is not because they're afraid of you, but because they might be planning something." Yi Xian frowned. "Planning what?" The old man looked at Yi Xian. "Who is that woman behind you?" Yi Xian fell silent. Who was that woman? He actually didn't know either. The old man asked again, "Can't you say?" Yi Xian said solemnly, "I don't know who she is either. Anyway, she's mine." The old man. Chapter 713. A woman in a plain dress. Actually, Yi Xian was very curious about who she was as well. Unfortunately, he'd asked her twice, yet she hadn't told him. In next to no time, the old man led Yi Xian into the city. and Yi Xian was stunned upon entering the city. The city was empty, there was nothing at all. Yi Xian gazed at the old man. Senior? The old man smiled. Mu Yu, you can call me Elder Mu. Yi Xian nodded. Elder Mu, why is there no one in the city? Mu Yu replied, you'll know in a moment. Yi Xian nodded and didn't ask any further questions. In next to no time, Elder Mu led Yi Xian to an underground entrance, and then both of them walked down along the entrance. After walking for around 15 minutes, both of them stopped. At this moment, Yi Xian was stunned. An underground city. There's a whole different world beneath the ground. There were quite a few people in the city, and all of their auras were extremely formidable. Especially these people's physical bodies. These people's physical bodies were generally very strong. Among them, he even had a few God realm physical bodies. The Taoist school. Yi Xian's brows knit together slightly. Exactly what sort of power is this? Elder Mu led Yi Xian to a hall. The hall was slightly simple, and there were some beast bones and drawings of demon beasts placed within it. He'd never seen any of these demon beasts. Meanwhile, an old man in cloth clothes appeared before them. The old man was thin, and he held a walking stick in his hand. Moreover, there was a deep scar of a sword on his face. Elder Mu bowed slightly when he saw the old man, and then he withdrew himself. He shot a glance at Yi Xian before he left. The old man glanced at Yi Xian. Sit. Yi Xian bowed slightly. Senior, may I know your name? The old man replied, Bu. Yi Xian nodded. Senior Bu, I came here to meet little Qi. Bu looked at Yi Xian. You want her to go back? Yi Xian nodded. The position of the divine nation's divine master was originally hers. Bu shook his head. She can't go back for now. Yi Xian frowned. Why? Bu said, she has other things to do. Yi Xian looked at Bu. I want to see her. Bu shook his head. No. Yi Xian smiled and said, Senior, can't I just meet him? Bu looked at Yi Xian. No. Yi Xian nodded. In the next moment, an illusory Shao Ta suddenly appeared between his brows. The moment this Shao Ta appeared, a powerful pressure suddenly spread out from his body. At the same time, the executing heaven sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly shook violently, and a powerful force directly enveloped Bu. The current him had many enemies. He didn't want to make more enemies, much less an enemy like the Taoist faction. However, he didn't mind having an enemy like the Taoist faction. Because he had too many enemies, it didn't matter if there was one or two more. Bu looked at Yi Xian. You want to fight? Yi Xian smiled. Sir, 7 is my friend. I want to meet her. Is there a problem? Is there a problem? Bu looked at the prison pagoda between Yi Xian's brows and said softly, 5 dimensions. The moment he said that, he waved his right hand. Hong. A powerful force enveloped Yi Xian. The prison pagoda between Yi Xian's brows returned to his body. Not only that, but Yi Xian felt like his body was frozen and he couldn't move at all. It was over. He had met an expert. Yi Xian's face darkened. This old man was at least above Deng Feng. Bu looked at Yi Xian. Follow me. After saying that, he got up and walked outside. At this time, the force on Yi Xian's body had disappeared. Yi Xian thought about it and followed Bu. On the way, Bu said softly, it's not a bad thing to be young and rash. However, don't go overboard. As far as I know, there are no less than 3 people in the Xian Yuan family who can kill you instantly. 3 people. Yi Xian fell silent. Bu said again, you might be thinking why they didn't make a move. They didn't make a move not because they were afraid of you, but because they were afraid of the woman behind you. Killing you is easy, but dealing with that woman is extremely difficult. If you are alive, that woman will have some misgivings. If you are dead, that woman will have no misgivings. If that kind of expert were to act recklessly, no one would not be afraid. Yi Xian said solemnly, "Senior means that they didn't kill me because they are afraid of the person behind me?" Bu smiled. "Not really. There is another reason, which is the problem after killing you." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Bu said, "If the Xianyuan family kills you, then first, they will have to bear the revenge of the person behind you. Second, they will have to face the other forces. Whoever has a fifth-dimensional treasure will be targeted. So, obtaining a fifth-dimensional treasure is not difficult. The difficult part is how to protect it." Yi Xian looked at Bu. "What about the Dao sect's attitude?" Bu looked at Yi Xian. "My Dao sect does not want to provoke you." Yi Xian asked, "Why? Are you not tempted by the fifth-dimensional treasure?" Bu said calmly, "You have too many people backing you." Yi Xian was speechless. At that moment, Bu suddenly stopped. He pointed at a door not far away. It was a black door, and it was pitch black inside. He couldn't see anything. Yi Xian asked, "Little Seven is inside?" Bu nodded. "Go in." Yi Xian did not think much. He turned into a ray of sword light and entered the door. The moment he entered the door, Yi Xian felt his vision turn pitch black. He felt the space around him tremble crazily. Just like that, after a quarter of an hour, he felt his surroundings return to normal. Yi Xian opened his eyes. At this moment, he was in a wasteland. The sky was dark and the surroundings were silent. Yi Xian frowned slightly. What was this place? At this time, Yi Xian's expression changed. He suddenly turned around and slashed down with his sword. Bang! The sword fell. Yi Xian retreated hundreds of feet. The moment he stopped, the ground under his feet exploded. Yi Xian looked into the distance. However, there was nothing there. Yi Xian frowned slightly. At this time, his expression changed. He pulled out his sword and slashed. Bang! The moment the sword slashed down, he retreated hundreds of feet again. Yi Xian looked into the distance. There was nothing in front of him. There was nothing there. Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly. A moment later, the spatial Dao suddenly appeared at the center of his forehead. In the blink of an eye, Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed it towards the right. Bang! An afterimage retreated repeatedly, but it vanished as it retreated. How strange! Yi Xian frowned. At this moment, the space in front of him suddenly split open. The next second, a bloody mouth was about to bite him. Yi Xian raised his hand and slashed. Hiss! The sound of something slicing resounded. This time, he'd utilized the execution heaven sword. A black shadow retreated repeatedly in front of Yi Xian, and it only stopped after moving 300 m back. When the black shadow stopped, Yi Xian got a clear look at the other party's face. It was a demon beast that was shaped like a wolf and had a ferocious appearance. At this moment, there was a deep gash on the demon beast's mouth, and if the gash was just a little bit further forward, then the demon beast's entire face would be split apart. The demon beast gazed at Yi Xian with a ferocious gaze, and it seemed like it intended to swallow Yi Xian up. Yi Xian's face was emotionless while he held tightly onto the execution heaven sword in his right hand. The demon beast glanced at the execution heaven sword in Yi Xian's grasp, and there was a trace of fear in its eyes. It bared its teeth at Yi Xian, and then it transformed into a ray of black light that vanished not too far away. It fled? Yi Xian was slightly stunned, and then he shook his head and smiled. That demon beast isn't stupid. Yi Xian glanced at the surroundings. Senior? Suddenly, the ground in the distance started trembling. Yi Xian frowned. What's going on? It didn't take long for a colossus to appear at the limits of Yi Xian's field of vision. It was a demon beast. The demon beast was huge, shaped like an ape, and its arms were like pillars. It was charging towards them at a speed that wasn't particularly fast, but with every step it took, the ground would tremble violently. It was incomparably terrifying. Yi Xian gripped the execution heaven sword tightly in his right hand. When the demon beast was within 100 feet of him, he was about to draw his sword when the sound of a sword suddenly came from the horizon. The demon beast immediately stopped and looked at the horizon. In the next moment, it turned around and ran. This time, it was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, it disappeared from Yi Xian's sight. Yi Xian turned his head to look at the horizon. At this moment, the sword light landed in front of him, and when the sword light dissipated, a little girl appeared in front of him. Shao Qi. The Shao Qi that he hadn't seen in a long time. Yi Xian was about to speak when Shao Qi suddenly said, "Follow me." With that, she turned around and walked away. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before following. Shao Qi brought Yi Xian forward. On the way, Yi Xian didn't speak. He knew that Shao Qi would give him an explanation. After a long time, Shao Qi said softly, "I'm sorry, I left without saying goodbye that day." Yi Xian looked at Shao Qi. "You are related to the Taoist faction?" Shao Qi said softly, "I have some connections with them." With that, she looked at Yi Xian. "The one who took your sister is a force called God Hall." God Hall? Yi Xian frowned. "I have never heard of it." Shao Qi said softly, "After we separated that day, people from this force attacked me." Yi Xian asked, "Why did they target you?" With that said, he seemed to have thought of something and asked again, "Because you are fated to be a human king?" Human king. He still remembered that Shao Qi was fated to be a human king. Shao Qi nodded, "Yes. This force is very strong. If I stayed in the chaotic universe, would implicate the entire chaotic universe." With that said, she looked at Yi Xian, "But I didn't expect that after I left, they would target you." Yi Xian said solemnly, "They want to find you through me?" Shao Qi nodded, "Not just that, but also that treasure on you. However, they seem to be afraid of that plain-dressed girl, so they didn't attack you openly. Instead, they want to use the Xianyuan family and the Wu clan to deal with you. They want to know the true strength of that plain-dressed girl." Plain-dressed girl. Yi Xian said solemnly, "They want to target her?" Shao Qi nodded, "Not only them, but many other forces are preparing to attack her." At this moment, old man Abu suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. He looked at Yi Xian, "You better inform her, otherwise, she will be in great danger. P.S. Later, I will send a red packet to everyone, remember to snatch it." Chapter 714. The plain-dressed woman was in great danger. Yi Xian had a strange expression on his face. If he were to be told that he was in great danger, he would believe it. After all, there was still a huge gap between him and these top forces. However, would the plain-dressed woman be in danger? That was the plain-dressed woman. The woman who was so powerful that she made people feel despair. In fact, only those who had fought with her would know how terrifying she was. However, those who had fought with her were basically all dead. Therefore, the true strength of the plain-dressed woman had always been a mystery to these forces. Everyone knew that she was strong, but they didn't know how strong she was. Therefore, many forces in Xianhuang Great World had always been guessing her true strength. At this moment, Abu said softly, "She is indeed extremely strong. From the looks of it, she is at least half-step unknown. However, not to mention half-step unknown, even the unknown realm is not invincible. Do you understand?" Yi Xian nodded, "I understand." Invincible? Yi Xian also understood that there was no such thing as true invincibility in this world. However, the plain-dressed woman could only be described as invincible. How strong was the sixth floor? How strong was Jian Zizai? However, they all respected the plain-dressed woman like a god. At this moment, Abu suddenly asked, "Who is that plain-dressed woman?" Yi Xian smiled bitterly, "Senior, I don't know. I really don't know." Abu nodded slightly and didn't say anything else. Yi Xian looked at Shao Qi and said solemnly, Shao Qi, you should be the ruler of God Nation yourself. Shao Qi was silent. Abu suddenly said, she can't go out for the time being. Yi Xian said solemnly, because of the God Temple? Abu nodded, if she goes out now, not only will she not be able to solve the current crisis of your northern territory, but it will also cause the God Temple to go crazy against your northern territory. Yi Xian was a little speechless, but I can't always be the ruler, right? God Nation King? He really didn't want to be the ruler. If it wasn't for Shao Qi's request, he definitely wouldn't have done it. In the eyes of others, being a divine master was a kind of power, but in his eyes, it was a kind of trouble, a big one at that. 7 said softly, I am sorry. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. Between you and me, there's no need to do this. It's just that I really can't protect myself now. If this continues, the entire divine kingdom will be dragged down by me. Look, the ones who want me dead are the Shenyuan family, the Wu clan, and this divine hall. There must be some other forces behind them that I don't know about. I'm really suffering. Abu glanced at Yi Xian. But if she goes out, the situation will worsen. Yi Xian said indifferently, Senior, I know that if she goes out, your Taoist school will definitely help her. But if she doesn't go out, your Taoist school will definitely not help me, right? Abu was silent. Yi Xian looked at 7, we are friends. If you are in trouble, I will definitely help you. However, you have to help me too. Look at me now, I get beaten up every day. I'm really miserable. 7 looked at Abu, he's miserable. Abu's mouth twitched. He glanced at Yi Xian and then said, my Taoist school will send 2 people half a step into Sealed Realm to help you, how about that? Half a step into Sealed Realm? Yi Xian jumped up right away. Senior, half a step into Sealed Realm? Why are they here? Are they here to die? Look, those powers all have ascended Seal Realm experts. Moreover, Qingcheng, Yi family, Ancestral Hall. Ancestor, Yi Xian has no talent and no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian will be removed from the position of prince and Yi Lang will take over. The one who spoke was a black-robed old man. Not far behind the old man stood a teen who had a smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi Manor elders. Why? Just at this time, a timid voice rang out in the hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. Her name was Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the family wanted to remove Yi Xian, she ignored her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The girl called Yi Ling bowed to everyone in the hall, asking timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is the prince, why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly, this is a family matter, what are you butting in for? Leave. Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged, whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed, you should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi Manor guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, this is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the family for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the family. The family is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of prince. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. But she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard, and smiled. What's your name? The guard quickly bowed. This subordinate, Zhang Mu, greets the prince. Yi Lang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and quickly bowed deeply. This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the prince, even if it means death. Yi Lang nodded. Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Don't hold back, understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, your man? As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed, brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu, and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the hall, and asked timidly, Great Elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The great elder looked at Yiling coldly. This is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting for? Leave. Yiling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the great elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged. Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new prince, Yiling, suddenly laughed. He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The great elder replied coldly, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, Yi clan guards rushed in. Yiling clenched her fists, and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yiling. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, Young Master Yiling inherits the position of prince. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yiling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yiling's face instantly swelled up. But she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yiling looked at the guard and smiled, What's your name? The guard quickly bowed. This subordinate, Zhang Mu, greets the prince. Yiling nodded, You're not bad. After I become the prince, I'll need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and quickly bowed deeply. This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the prince, even if it means death. Yiling nodded, Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't hold back, understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yiling, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yiling's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yiling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yiling's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yiling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yiling, and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. Yiling did not stop there, and charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yiling suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yiling's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, Your man? As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yiling's side. Seeing Yiling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yiling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed, Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu, and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 7:15. Sparring. Yi Xian didn't use his executing heaven sword. Instead, he used an ordinary sword. Shao Qi used an ordinary sword as well. The moment they attacked, two sword hums soared into the sky and shook the world. Bang! A wave of sword light and sword energy exploded in front of them, causing them to retreat. As they retreated, countless flying swords suddenly appeared around them. Qi! Qi! The two of them were surrounded by flying swords, dazzling their eyes. After Yi Xian stopped, an afterimage appeared in front of him. Shao Qi. Yi Xian's expression was calm. He tilted his body slightly, and a sword passed right between his eyebrows. At this moment, he twisted his wrist, and the sword in his hand made a horizontal slash. The sword slashed through the air. Shao Qi was dozens of meters away. Yi Xian looked at Shao Qi. At that moment, a sword was already between his eyebrows. This sword was as fast as lightning. The moment the tip of the sword touched Yi Xian's skin, Yi Xian suddenly appeared behind Shao Qi like a ghost. At the same time, a sword light stabbed towards the back of Shao Qi's neck. This sword was as fast as lightning. Qi! Yi Xian's sword stabbed thin air. Shao Qi had disappeared. Yi Xian frowned. He turned around and blocked with his sword. Bang! Yi Xian retreated 300 m. Before he could stop, a sword was already at his throat. This time, Yi Xian didn't dodge. His left hand grabbed the sword in front of him. At that moment, Shao Qi's right hand spun slightly. Qi! Blood splattered from Yi Xian's left hand. At that moment, Yi Xian's sword stabbed forward. Qi! Two sounds of air being torn could be heard. Then, Shao Qi was already 30 m away. There was a deep wound on Yi Xian's left palm and between his eyebrows. Not far away, there was a red dot on Shao Qi's throat. Only that red dot. A life for a life. Somewhere in the darkness, Abu said softly, "This kid is a ruthless person." Elder Mu spoke in a low voice. "Your Majesty is probably superior in terms of attainments in the Sword Dao." Abu nodded, "She's slightly better, but when two people fight, it's not just about their individual strength, it's also about who's more ruthless. In terms of ruthlessness, she lost." Elder Mu spoke softly, "His Majesty is still young." Abu laughed and said, "That young man isn't old either." As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian in the distance and said softly, "In this world, only the ruthless are able to survive." In the distance, Seven and Yi Xian disappeared once more. Sword light crisscrossed. The battle between the two of them could be said to be extremely exciting. Whether it was combat techniques or sword techniques, the two of them could be said to be the best in this world. And this time, Yi Xian once again experienced the feeling he had when he fought with his life on the line in Qingcheng. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Especially when fighting against Shao Qi, the slightest mistake could be fatal. Simply speaking, they were playing with one's heart. On the other hand, Shao Qi felt pressured as well. The biggest headache she had when fighting Yi Xian was Yi Xian's disregard for his life. There were many times when he clearly could stomp, but he just didn't dodge. He just wanted to stab her, and he would stab her as well. Such a method of fighting really gave her a headache. At this moment, Abu suddenly spoke softly, "Stop." As soon as he finished speaking, Seven and Yi Xian stopped. Abu glanced at them and spoke softly, "The two of you can't decide on a victor, only life and death can be decided between the two of you." They couldn't decide on a victor, only life and death could be decided between the two of them. Regardless of whether it was Yi Xian or Seven, both of them hadn't used their full strength. Because it was impossible to decide on a victor if they didn't use their full strength, but once they did, then life and death would be decided. Yi Xian put his sword away, and then he gazed at Seven and smiled, "Let's spar next time." Seven nodded, "Next time." Yi Xian seemed to have thought about something and he looked towards Abu, Senior Abu, where is this place? Abu said, a trial ground of my Taoist faction. Trial ground. Yi Xian looked towards Seven. You are cultivating here? Seven nodded. Yi Xian said solemnly, Senior Abu, can I cultivate here too? Abu said calmly, yes, but you can't take that sword. Heaven's retribution. If Yi Xian brought that sword, then it wouldn't be a trial but a massacre. Very few beasts could block the sword in his hand. Yi Xian smiled, of course. Normally, he wouldn't take heaven's retribution. This sword was indeed a little overpowered. Only when he wanted to kill would he take it out. Yi Xian said, Seven, Senior Abu, I have something to do, so I will take my leave. Seven nodded, be careful. Yi Xian smiled, you too. Abu said, be careful of the temple. Yi Xian nodded, I will. After saying that, he cupped his fists towards the two of them before turning around and disappearing. On the spot, Seven looked at Yi Xian's back view. Who knew what she was thinking? Abu said softly, I know you want to help him, but now is not the time. You are very important, and if you attack, the temple will kill you at all costs. And we are not ready to fight the Temple of Light yet. Shao Qi's eyes slowly closed. The temple, after saying that, she suddenly turned around and left. Abu was silent for a moment before asking, what is the temple doing recently? A voice rang out beside him, they are investigating the plain-dressed girl. Plain-dressed girl. Abu said softly, have our people found any information about her? The voice said, not yet. Every time she appears, it is related to Yi Xian. I am afraid only Yi Xian knows who she is. Abu was silent and no one knew what he was thinking. At this moment, the voice said again, based on my investigation, they seem to be working together. Working together. Abu's eyes narrowed slightly, it seems that they are going to attack the plain-dressed girl. After saying that, he looked into the distance and said softly, once that woman is dead, I am afraid that Yi Xian will also. After Yi Xian left, he returned to the northern region. The current northern region, under the governance of Jiang Jiao and Shangguan had slowly recovered its former prosperity. Now the people of the northern region had gradually submitted because the Divine Kingdom's method of governance was better than that of the Black-Yellow Great World. The forces from the chaotic universe did not plunder the resources of the northern region. On the contrary, in order to attract outstanding talents, the major forces gave many benefits. At first, the people of the northern region were still wary of the Divine Kingdom, but later, more and more people recognized the Divine Kingdom. Of course, they also recognized Yi Xian. Because so far, Yi Xian had not plundered the people of the northern region. Inside the hall, Yi Xian summoned Shangguan and Jiang Jiao. With a wave of Yi Xian's right hand, 3 white jade bottles appeared in front of the two women. Yi Xian said, this is a divine state pill, it can help people advance to the divine state. Divide it among yourselves. Divine state pill. Shangguan glanced at the white jade bottle in her hand, hesitated for a moment, and then said, it's too precious. This pill could be said to be truly priceless. Yi Xian said softly, it's useless for me to be strong alone. We need the strength of the northern region as a whole. The northern region. He was no longer alone. It could be said that he had a family with him. It was useless for him to be strong alone. He had to be strong as a whole. Now, there was still a big gap between the overall strength of the northern region and the strength of the Shenyuan family. But fortunately, the top people of the northern region, such as Mu Nanji and the others, could be said to be geniuses among geniuses. As long as they were given enough opportunities, these people could completely become superclass experts. In addition, Enlanxiao and some geniuses of the Divine Kingdom, such as Yuan Yi and the others, these people were also very monstrous. They didn't lack natural talent, they lacked resources. Shangguan glanced at Yi Xian, and then she nodded before turning around and leaving. Yi Xian gazed at Jiang Jiao. Has there been any movement from the surrounding territories? Jiang Jiu shook her head. There hasn't been any movement. It isn't just them, the Xianyuan clan and sword martial school have gone completely silent as well. As she spoke, she gazed at Yi Xian. They won't give up, right? Yi Xian nodded. Jiang Jiu spoke in a low voice. Can you contact that woman in a plain dress? The woman in a plain dress? Yi Xian shook his head. He couldn't contact her as well. Jiang Jiu sighed softly when she saw this. She was naturally worried because both the Xianyuan clan and sword martial school were targeting Yi Xian. These ancient powers were definitely not as simple as they seemed on the surface. The calmer it was now, the crazier it would be in the future. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Don't be too worried. No matter what happens, I'll deal with it first." Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian got up and walked to the entrance of the grand hall. He raised his head and looked at the distant horizon. His right hand tightly gripped the executing heaven sword at his waist. No one knew what he was thinking. At this moment, a hand was placed on Yi Xian's hand. Jiang Jiu's hand. Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian and softly said, "No matter what the future holds, we'll deal with it together with you." Yi Xian was just about to speak when a black-clothed man appeared in front of Yi Xian like a ghost. "Emperor Yi, His Majesty wants you to be mentally prepared." His Majesty. Black-Yellow Lord. Yi Xian smiled and said, "What's wrong?" The black-clothed man didn't say anything and quietly left. Yi Xian was silent. Jiang Jiu held Yi Xian's hand tightly. At this moment, a powerful pressure suddenly appeared in the sky above Tianjiang City. Everyone in Tianjiang City was shocked. Countless people looked up and saw an old man standing in the sky above Tianjiang City. The old man wore a black robe that was as black as ink, and there was a dark black dragon tattooed on his chest. From the old man's body, a wave of pressure surged out like a tidal wave. Everyone in Tianjiang City suddenly felt suffocated. The old man stood in the air and looked down. Soon, his gaze landed on Yi Xian at the entrance of the grand hall. The old man looked down at Yi Xian with a calm expression. 3 days later, at the peak of Cliff Mountain. "If you don't come, then we'll start a war in the northern region. If you come, even if you die, we won't slaughter the northern region, nor will we slaughter anyone around you." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and disappeared in a flash of black light. In the city, countless people looked in Yi Xian's direction. At the peak of Cliff Mountain. At the entrance of the grand hall, Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian. "Don't go." After a moment of silence, Yi Xian smiled and said, "If I don't go, what will happen to the northern region? What will you guys do?" As he spoke, he looked up at the end of the horizon. "This is an open plot. I have to go. P.S. I'm looking for a part-time job. Does anyone have any good recommendations?" Chapter 716. At the summit of Cliff Mountain. Yi Xian sat in the main hall while Shangguanxian, and Jiang Jiu stood quietly in front of him. Shangguanxian said, "The summit of Cliff Mountain is located in the extreme south. This mountain is tens of thousands of zhang high. Standing on the summit is like standing in the starry sky. There used to be a super sect called Sword Sect." Sword Sect. Yi Xian was stunned. Sword Sect? Yi Xian looked at Shangguanxian. Shangguanxian was about to speak when Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Sword Sect? Are you sure?" Shangguanxian nodded. "Why?" Yi Xian said solemnly, "Our black-yellow great world also has a sword sect. Don't tell me you don't know about it." Shangguanxian nodded. "I know, but it might be the same name." Same name. Yi Xian shook his head. He'd already seen a few sword sect members, and there was definitely some sort of connection between them. The executing heaven sword was obtained from one of the sword sect. Yi Xian said, tell me about this sword sect. Shangguan Xian nodded. This sword sect appeared a bit early. At that time, there was no Xianyuan clan and Wu clan. After the sword sect disappeared, Xianyuan clan and Wu clan appeared. Yi Xian frowned. This sword sect existed before them? Shangguan Xian nodded. Yes, this sword sect is an ancient force. As for why they disappeared, no one knows. However, it is said that the Xianyuan clan obtained the divine sword from the sword sect. Sword sect. Yi Xian said, this time, the Xianyuan clan must be among the forces that want to deal with me. There must be a reason why they chose the peak of the cliff mountain. Shangguan Xian nodded. There must be a reason, but we can't find anything. How many people are there against us? Who are they? We. Yi Xian smiled and said, it's not your fault. We've just arrived here and our foundation is weak. We can't compare to these veteran forces. Shangguan Xian nodded. We will work hard. Yi Xian nodded. I'll make a trip to the bound of universe. That woman should know more. As he spoke, he looked at the two women. I'll leave the northern region to you. After saying that, he disappeared. In the same place, Shangguan Xian whispered, ninth young lady, I'm a little flustered. Jiang Jiu was silent. She was also a little panicked. This time, would Yi Xian be able to survive? After leaving the northern region, Yi Xian headed straight for the Xianhuang world. At the entrance of the Xianhuang palace, Elder Yang stood in front of Yi Xian and said, Emperor Yi, His Majesty is temporarily unable to receive guests. Please forgive him. Yi Xian glanced at the hall. When can she receive guests? Elder Yang said, 3 days later. Yi Xian looked at Elder Yang. 3 days later? Elder Yang nodded. Yi Xian smiled and said, is she deliberately avoiding me? Elder Yang did not speak. Yi Xian nodded. I won't force it. Goodbye. With that, he turned and left. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from the hall. Young Master Yi. It was the voice of the Xianhuang Lord. Yi Xian turned around. At this moment, the Xianhuang Lord walked out. She walked in front of Yi Xian and smiled slightly. Young Master Yi, are you here for the matter of the summit of Cliff Mountain? Yi Xian nodded. I want to ask the Xianhuang Lord. The Xianhuang Lord was silent. Yi Xian smiled and said, you can't say? The Xianhuang Lord said softly, I'm afraid they are determined to win this time. Determined to win. Yi Xian said in a low voice, I want to know who they are. The Xianhuang Lord looked at Yi Xian. The Xianyuan family, the Wu clan, the Tian men, and the Jinwu school. These 4 are known to me. Already known. Yi Xian smiled and said, what about the unknown? The Xianhuang Lord shook her head. I don't know. Yi Xian asked again, are they targeting me or the plain-dressed woman? The Xianhuang Lord looked at Yi Xian. Is there a difference? If they are targeting you, it means that they have a way to deal with the plain-dressed woman. Yi Xian was silent. The Xianhuang Lord said softly, actually, you can escape. Escape. Yi Xian looked at the Xianhuang Lord and smiled. How? The Xianhuang Lord looked at Yi Xian. If you escape, I believe that even they will not be able to find you easily. However, you have to give up everyone in the northern region. Give up everyone in the northern region. Yi Xian shook his head with a smile. Is there any other way? The Xianhuang Lord smiled. Only when people are alive can they have unlimited possibilities. Young Master Yi is a genius. If you live for a few more decades, you will be invincible in the Xianhuang Great World. You might even have a wider stage. Why would you need to fight them to the death? Yi Xian spread his hands and smiled. Actually, I also want to escape. However, if I escape, do you think they will let the northern region go? The Xianhuang Lord smiled. They are all unimportant people. Why do you care so much about them? Yi Xian looked at the Xianhuang Lord. They are my friends and my followers. The Xianhuang Lord looked at Yi Xian for a long time. In the end, she nodded. Then I wish young Master Yi good luck. No, I should say, I hope that the person behind young Master Yi is strong enough. After saying that, she turned to leave. However, she soon stopped. Young Master Yi, the peak of this cliff mountain was the place where the Xianyuan family's ancestor comprehended the Tao. The Xianyuan family's divine sword is here. They must have chosen this place for a reason. Young Master Yi, be careful. Yi Xian nodded. Thank you for the reminder. I will remember this favor. After saying that, he turned to leave. As he watched Yi Xian leave, Elder Yang asked softly, Your Majesty, what are his chances of winning? If he is alone, he has no chance of winning. The Xianhuang Lord said. What if the woman in the plain dress is included? The Xianhuang Lord said softly, If the woman is in the unknown realm, she might have a chance of survival. If she is not, she will definitely die. Hearing that, Elder Yang's expression turned serious. Why? The Xianhuang Lord's expression gradually turned serious. The peak of the cliff mountain. That place is not simple. Elder Yang wanted to ask more, but the Xianhuang Lord had already walked into the main hall. Elder Yang fell silent. Inside the main hall, the Xianhuang Lord came to a portrait of a middle-aged man. The middle-aged man in the portrait wore a light green robe. His hands were behind his back as he looked forward. The founder of the Xianhuang realm, Li Xuani. This name once belonged to an era. During that era, this person suppressed all the major forces in the Xianhuang realm and founded the Xianhuang realm single-handedly. That was the Xianhuang realm's most glorious time. Now, the Xianhuang realm was almost forgotten by the world. The title of Xianhuang Lord was actually a joke. Because the people outside did not recognize it. The reason why the Xianhuang realm still existed was because of the person in the portrait. Although Li Xuani had disappeared for many years, no force dared to underestimate him. Because back then, he was known as the person most likely to surpass the unknown realm. If such a person left a wisp of his soul in the Xianhuang realm, whoever wanted to destroy the Xianhuang realm would have to bear his wrath. When the Xianhuang realm was weak, they voluntarily gave up on controlling the territories outside. Therefore, no force dared to fight them to the death. Everyone was afraid of Li Xuani. The Xianhuang Lord looked at the portrait for a long time before she suddenly chuckled. Ancestor, the Xianhuang realm will not decline. It definitely won't. As soon as she finished speaking, she walked to the portrait. She opened her palm and a flying dagger landed in it. The flying dagger was missing a corner. The Xianhuang Lord looked at the flying dagger in her hand and smiled. Everyone says that the Xianyuan clan's divine sword is the sharpest. Actually, who would know that the sharpest divine weapon in the Xianhuang realm is you? As she said that, she seemed to think of something and her smile gradually disappeared. You have now met an opponent. The sharpness of that sword is probably not inferior to yours. At that moment, the flying dagger suddenly trembled and a ray of light flashed across the blade. The Xianhuang Lord smiled. I'll let you two have a spar some other day. After saying that, she turned and left. After Yi Xian returned to the northern region, he locked himself in his room. In the prison pagoda, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. In front of him were 3 divine state swords. Breaking through to the Tao realm. Yi Xian picked up a divine state sword and stabbed it into his abdomen. Qi. A wave of pure energy immediately spread out from his body. Soon, Yi Xian's entire body began to tremble. Boom! Powerful auras began to vibrate from Yi Xian's body. The surrounding space began to ripple, but it quickly returned to normal. This time, Yi Xian sped up his absorption because he did not have much time left. He was now in the creation realm, so he had to reach the Tao realm. Every time he advanced a realm, it was a huge improvement to his current strength. This time, it would be fine if the plain-dressed woman appeared on his trip to the cliff mountain. However, if she did not appear, he would have to rely on himself. He could not place all his hopes on the plain-dressed woman, because he was not 100% sure that the plain-dressed woman would appear. Just like that, time passed bit by bit. On the second day, he had already devoured all 3 divine swords. If it was not for the fact that his physical body was strong enough, he might have played himself to death. Because the energy of the 3 divine swords was too strong. Absorbed crazily. Late at night the next day, Yi Xian suddenly stood up. As soon as he stood up, a powerful aura suddenly surged out of his body. He opened his eyes, and 2 beams of sword light shot out of them. At this time, a smear of blood slowly flowed out from his mouth. Yi Xian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and smiled bitterly. This time, although he had forcefully broken through to the Dao realm, he was still too anxious. This anxiety caused quite a bit of damage to his internal organs. But fortunately, he had a divine state physical body, so the damage was not too serious. If it was not for the fact that his physical body was strong enough, he might have really played himself until he was crippled. Collecting his thoughts, Yi Xian left the prison pagoda. At this moment, it was already late at night. In the night sky, a bright moon hung in the sky. Yi Xian smiled slightly, and then he transformed into a ray of sword light that shot into the sky. But he quickly stopped. Not far in front of him stood 3 people. Enlanxiu, Mo Xia, and Lian Wanli, who was holding a large blade. Mo Xia looked at Yi Xian and smiled slightly. You have to bring us along. Yi Xian said softly, we will die. Mo Xia said, we are friends. As he spoke, he walked in front of Yi Xian and said softly, I will go with you and risk my life. Chapter 717. Friends. What was called a true friend? It was the person who stood up for you when you were in the most difficult and dangerous situation. Adversity reveals a man's heart. Looking at Mo Xia and the other 2, Yi Xian suddenly smiled. On the road ahead, he was not alone. He, Yi Xian, had countless enemies in his life, but he also had his own brothers and beauties. Yi Xian looked at the 3 and smiled, I'll go. Mo Xia shook his head, I can help. As his voice faded, he opened his palm and a powerful force vibrated out from his palm. Deity Realm. Yi Xian was a little surprised. He didn't think that Mo Xia actually reached the deity realm. As if thinking of something, he quickly looked at Enlanxiu and Lian Wanli. The 2 of them also reached the deity realm. Deity Realm. As if knowing what Yi Xian was thinking, Lian Wanli suddenly said, Deity Realm Pill. Deity Realm Pill. Yi Xian understood. The talent of the 3 people in front of him was not inferior to him at all, maybe even above him. What these 3 people lacked were opportunities and resources. Many times, Yi Xian thought that if the World Prison Pagoda was with these 3 people, perhaps they would be more outstanding than him. In this world, many people were really outstanding and worked hard enough. However, in this world, many times, hard work was not enough. 90% effort, 10% opportunity. But if he didn't have that opportunity, all his efforts would be in vain. Hard work. Yi Xian tightly grasped the sword in his hand. There were too many outstanding people in this world. Yi Xian retracted his thoughts and looked at the 3 people in front of him, let me go alone this time. He was very clear what he was going to face. The 3 people in front of him were all very strong. Although they were only at the deity realm, they could definitely fight with a half-step sealed realm expert. However, what he was going to face now was definitely not a half-step sealed realm, but a sealed realm expert, or even higher. Mo Xia and the other 2 would only be sacrificing for nothing. Mo Xia shook his head, we've already decided, there's no need to say anymore. Yi Xian shook his head. It's meaningless. Mo Xia looked at Yi Xian. For us, there is. Yi Xian was silent. At this moment, Enlancio walked in front of Yi Xian and looked at Yi Xian. We'll face it together. Lian Wanli also nodded slightly. You can't be the only one to shoulder everything. Yi Xian was just about to speak when Mo Xia looked up at the horizon. At the end of the horizon, the sky was already turning white. It's daybreak. Let's go. Yi Xian looked at the three people in front of him. Do you really want to go together? Lian Wanli said unhappily, can you stop being so wishy-washy? Let's go. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment before he said, then let's go. With that, the four of them disappeared into the horizon. After the four of them left, Shangguan and Jiang Jiu walked over. Shangguan looked at the horizon and said softly, they will come back, right? Jiang Jiu nodded. They will. They definitely will. At the end of the distant horizon, Yi Xian was flying on his sword. Beside him were Mo Xia and the other two. Yi Xian's eyes were closed. No one knew what he was thinking. Mo Xia's right hand was clenched tightly in front of his chest. His left hand was holding an ancient book, and he was reading it with great interest. At this moment, Lian Wanli looked at Yi Xian. Do you know who our opponents are? Yi Xian said, Xian Yuan family, Wu clan, Sword Martial Gate, and that Elysium. This is what we know, and there are still some that we don't know. Lian Wanli said softly, there are still some that we don't know? Yi Xian nodded. Lian Wanli asked again, what are our chances of winning? Yi Xian said, I don't know. Lian Wanli nodded and didn't ask anything else. At this moment, Yi Xian looked up at the horizon and said softly, we can't care so much anymore. Let's just fight them. Mo Xia smiled. That's true. We have no way out. Let's just fight. Yi Xian laughed. Let's fight them. As soon as he said that, the four of them sped up. In the Bound of Universe, the Master of Universe sat on the stone steps in front of the Bound of Universe palace. A man in black was kneeling in front of her. The Master of Universe said softly, just the four of them? The man in black nodded. Only four. The Master of Universe was silent for a moment, then asked softly, are you sure? The man in black said, I'm sure. The Master of Mysterious Yellow smiled. This is going to be interesting. As she said that, she seemed to have thought of something and asked, is there any movement from the Taoist gate? The man in black shook his head. I don't know. Our people can't get in at all. The Master of Universe stood up. Let's go. Let's see how this ends. After saying that, she walked into the distance. Behind her, 5 men in black suddenly appeared. All 5 of them were in the Ascending Foam realm. On the way, someone asked, Your Majesty, are you going to make a move? The Master of Universe grinned. That depends. The voice spoke in a low voice, this isn't a simple matter. The slightest mistake will cause us to be doomed. The Master of Universe spoke softly, I hope they fight more ferociously. The Taoist Gate. Abu stood on the city wall and looked into the sky. Elder Mu was by his side. Elder Mu spoke in a low voice, are those clans really going to fight to the death with Yi Xian? Abu smiled, what else? Not to mention them, even we are tempted by that treasure. Elder Mu gazed at Abu, Elder. Abu grinned, don't worry, we won't make a move against him. Strictly speaking, that kid is on our side. Moreover, we need time right now, and he just happens to be able to buy some time for us. Elder Mu spoke in a low voice, what are his chances of winning? Abu shook his head, that depends on the woman's strength. If she's strong, then he might have a chance at survival. The woman in a plain dress. Elder Mu had a slightly complicated expression on his face, she's truly mysterious. Abu nodded, indeed. However, we should be able to find out her true strength once she makes an appearance. As he spoke, he looked up into the sky. Let's go. Let's go have a look. Let's see what the outcome will be today. As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished on the spot. Elder Mu vanished along with him. The Sword Force Sect. The Sword Force Hall. The Sword Force Hall was the most sacred place in the Sword Force sect because it was where the founding ancestor resided all those years ago. The hall was extremely huge, and there was only a single statue in the entire hall. It was a white-robed woman with a wine gourd hanging on her waist, and she seemed extremely heroic. It was the founding ancestor of the Sword Force sect. She was invincible in the Sky-Earth world all those years ago. Her fists were peerless. However, most people had only seen her use her fists, and very few had seen her use her sword. So, her attainments in the sword Dao had always been a mystery. However, her fists were sufficient to dominate that era. Meanwhile, the door to the hall was suddenly opened, and then an old man walked in. The old man wore a black robe and had a head full of white hair. He seemed quite old, but his eyes were bright and piercing like a blade. He was the previous sect master of the Sword Force sect, Chen Biejiang. If this name had been spoken 1,000 years ago, then it would have been known to all. Chen Biejiang walked over to the statue and bowed respectfully. Founding ancestor. This battle is related to the rise and fall of my Sword Force sect. I hope founding ancestor will protect my Sword Force sect. As soon as he finished speaking, he opened his palm, and then a pitch-black box flew into his hand from behind the statue. Chen Biejiang put the box away, bowed once more, and then turned around and left. The statue behind him gazed ahead with an indifferent expression. The Xianyuan clan. On this day, a hunchbacked old man walked into the hall. The old man's back was very hunched, and it made him seem very short. A black-sheathed sword hung from his waist. He was the previous patriarch of the Xianyuan clan. However, he'd lived for too long. It was so long that even many people within the Xianyuan clan didn't know which patriarch he was. They only knew that there was such a person in the clan. The hunchbacked old man walked in front of a statue. The statue in front of him was that of the Xianyuan clan's old ancestor, Xianyuan Shi. The reason why the Xianyuan clan had risen so powerfully in the past was because of this man. One man and one sword had risen powerfully in the mysterious yellow great world. The hunchbacked old man bowed deeply towards the statue. Then, he opened his palm, and the sword hanging from the statue's waist suddenly turned into a golden sword light and flew into his palm. The hunchbacked old man put away the sword, turned around, and left. Somewhere in the clouds, a white-clothed old man stood quietly. Beside him stood a black-clothed old man. If Yi Xian were here, he would be able to recognize these two people. These two people were the ones who had taken Yi Ling away. The Divine Temple. The white-clothed old man was expressionless. Just the four of them? The black-clothed old man nodded. Just the four of them. The white-clothed old man asked, "Where is the little girl from the Sword Force sect now?" The black-clothed old man hesitated for a moment, and then said, "I don't know." The white-clothed old man frowned. "I don't know?" The black-clothed old man nodded. "That little girl was extraordinarily swift, and we weren't able to catch up to her at all. Moreover, we didn't dare to get too close." The white-clothed old man fell silent for a short moment before he said, "Forget it. It's just a clone, so there's no need to pay attention to her." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and looked towards the distance. A mountain stood towering amidst the clouds in the distance. The peak of Precipice Mountain. Moreover, there was a stone sword hanging upside down at the peak of Precipice Mountain. The white-clothed old man spoke in a light voice. An extraordinary power resided there all those years ago. The black-clothed old man asked, "The sword sect?" The white-clothed old man nodded. "The sword sect. It's very strong." The black-clothed old man spoke in a low voice. "Revered ambassador, you seem to know that sect very well." The white-clothed old man nodded. "Only the oldest group of people know how terrifying that sect is. All those years ago, when the sword sect revealed its sword, would anyone dare to go against it? The black-clothed old man said, "What's the relationship between the Xianyuan clan and the sword sect?" The white-clothed old man laughed with ridicule. He was just lucky and obtained a fortuitous encounter. When he spoke up to this point, he seemed to have thought of something, and his brows knit together slightly. "However, that sword is quite special." "A divine sword?" asked the black-clothed old man. The white-clothed old man nodded. "That sword will probably have a miraculous effect at the peak of Precipice Mountain." When he spoke up to this point, he suddenly looked down and said, "They're here." Not too far away, a man was flying over on a sword, and there were another man and 2 women by his side. It was Yi Xian's group of 4. P.S. Please watch the original. Otherwise, I'm going to dive into the sea. I'm not joking. Chapter 7:18. At the peak of Precipice Mountain. Yi Xian's group of 4 arrived at the foot of Precipice Mountain. They couldn't see the peak of Precipice Mountain from where they stood because it was too high. They were already above the clouds. The sword sect. Yi Xian raised his head and looked towards the peak. He was slightly curious about the sword sect on Precipice Mountain. Is the sword sect related to the sword sect in the Chaos verse? After a short moment, Yi Xian spoke softly, "Let's go up." As soon as he finished speaking, he transformed into a ray of light that shot into the sky. Enrich and the others followed behind Yi Xian. Before long, Yi Xian's group of 4 arrived at the peak of Precipice Mountain. The peak of Precipice Mountain was coiled by clouds and mist, and it seemed like an immortal paradise. Yi Xian walked towards the distance, and damaged swords could be seen everywhere on both sides of his path. There was a black palace 300 m away from him, and a stone sword floated in the air above the palace. Before long, Yi Xian's group of 4 arrived before the palace. There were 2 large black words inscribed above the palace's stone door, "Sword Sect." The Sword Sect. Yi Xian looked through the door and saw a statue standing towering before the palace. Yi Xian was stunned when he saw the statue. He recognized it. It was the statue of the man in green clothes. It's him again. He really is related to the sword sect in the Chaos verse. Yi Xian sped up and walked over to the statue. The man looked ahead, and there was a white little fellow sitting on his shoulder. He knew this little fellow as well. It was the little fellow that had come to help Xiaoling that day. This little fellow was on the same side as the man in green clothes. Yi Xian's gaze descended onto the man in green clothes, and his heart was filled with curiosity. Why do so many sword sects have statues of this man? What was the identity of this azure-robed man? Meanwhile, Xiaoling suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian, and she pointed at the little fellow on the man's shoulder. Yi Xian smiled and said, "It's her." Xiaoling curiously looked at the little guy, then looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and said, "We will have the opportunity to meet in the future." Xiaoling nodded and returned to the prison pagoda. Yi Xian looked at the sword at the waist of the green-robed man. He was also familiar with this sword. It was the sword at the top of the pagoda. It was obvious that this azure-clothed man was one of the people who had heavily injured the world prison pagoda. Yi Xian went silent for a short moment before he walked towards the hall. In next to no time, he, and Lanxiu, and the others arrived within the hall, but the hall was completely empty. However, the hall was very clean. It was obvious that someone had cleaned it frequently. Yi Xian smiled and said, "What? Still not coming out?" As soon as he finished speaking, 4 people suddenly appeared in front of him. The one in the lead was a hunchbacked old man. The old man held a golden sword in his hand, and he looked at Yi Xian with a calm expression in his eyes. Beside the hunchbacked old man stood a black-robed old man. This person was the sword martial sect's ancestor, Qin Biejiang. Qin Biejiang's gaze had always been on the sword at Yi Xian's waist. And beside Qin Biejiang stood a middle-aged man. The middle-aged man was tall and sturdy, and his face was densely covered in all sorts of mysterious talisman markings, causing him to look rather horrifying. The Wu clan. The person before them was the current patriarch of the Wu clan, Fu Yu. On Fu Yu's right stood a black-robed man. The black-robed man wore a bamboo hat on his head, and his true appearance couldn't be seen. This person was the sect master of the Heavenly Gate. No one knew his true identity, nor did anyone know his name. Yi Xian looked at the sect master of the Heavenly Gate and said with a smile, "When I came, you said that we would mind our own business." The sect master of the Heavenly Gate said in a hoarse voice, "That was then, and this is now." Yi Xian laughed heartily, "That was then, and this is now." After saying that, he looked at the four people. "What, do you want to have a chat with me?" The hunchbacked old man of the Xian Yuan family looked at Yi Xian. "Young man, you are a smart person. You should understand what's best for you." Yi Xian said with a smile, "You are also smart people. As far as I know, there is a deity Templar behind you, right?" The hunchbacked old man slightly narrowed his eyes. "You know quite a lot." Yi Xian said with a smile, "What I don't understand is, if you kill me, who will get the fifth dimensional treasure? Will it be the four of you, or the deity Templar behind you?" The hunchbacked old man shook his head. "At this time, don't play such petty tricks. As for how to divide it, we will discuss it." After saying that, he looked at Yi Xian. "You have two choices. First, call out the person behind you and fight to the death with us. Second, hand over the fifth dimensional treasure and the sword martial sect's divine sword." Yi Xian said with a smile, "After I hand it over, will you let me go?" The hunchbacked old man looked at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. Yi Xian looked at the four people and said with a smile, "Actually, no matter what, you won't let me live, right?" The hunchbacked old man nodded, "Yes." Yi Xian spread his hands. "Then what is there to talk about? Fight? Fight." Hearing Yi Xian's words, the hunchbacked old man looked at Yi Xian and just looked at him. He didn't fight. He wasn't afraid of Yi Xian, but he was afraid of the person behind Yi Xian. The woman in a plain dress behind Yi Xian was too mysterious. So mysterious that they couldn't help but be afraid. If it weren't for the fifth dimensional treasure being too tempting, they wouldn't be willing to become enemies with such a powerhouse. At this time, the ancestor of the sword martial sect, Qin Biejiang, suddenly said, "What are you hesitating for?" Hearing this, the hunchbacked old man slightly nodded and waved his right hand. Bang! The entire sword sect hall suddenly collapsed. After the sword sect hall collapsed, four beams of light suddenly appeared around Yi Xian's group of four. Sword beams. Four sword beams soared into the sky, piercing through the clouds. Following the appearance of these four sword beams, a sword chi wall directly appeared around Yi Xian's group. Sword array. Yi Xian smiled. "To deal with the four of us, you need to make such a big scene?" The hunchbacked old man was expressionless. "If I'm not mistaken, your people should be nearby, right?" Yi Xian looked at the hunchbacked old man. "Guess." The hunchbacked old man didn't waste any words and suddenly swung his palm forward. With a wave of this palm, the surrounding space was directly shattered. At the moment the hunchbacked old man made his move, Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Chi! A sword beam slashed down, tearing everything apart. Bang! An explosion resounded abruptly. In the next moment, Yi Xian's figure was blasted flying, and his figure smashed against the sword chi wall. Bang! The entire sword chi wall shook violently, and then Yi Xian's figure smashed against the ground. After the hunchbacked old man blasted Yi Xian flying, he didn't attack again, and he just turned around to glance at the surroundings. All three of them had rather vigilant expressions on their faces. This time, their objective really wasn't Yi Xian. Yi Xian was a monstrous genius indeed, and he was an extremely monstrous genius. However, Yi Xian was still too young, and he wasn't a threat to them. What they were truly afraid of was the woman in a plain dress who stood behind Yi Xian. Even though they'd prepared themselves, they still didn't dare underestimate an expert of such a level in the slightest. However, there was no movement in the surroundings. The hunchbacked old man's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he turned around to gaze at Yi Xian, who stood nearby. "Aren't you going to call your people over?" Yi Xian wiped off the blood on the corner of his mouth, and then he suddenly vanished. "OM." A sword howl suddenly resounded. The boundless sword. At the instant that Yi Xian vanished, the hunchbacked old man's pupils constricted slightly, and then he pressed his palms together. This time, a ray of sword light was pressed together. However, the tip of a sword had still pierced half an inch into the center of his forehead. Fresh blood sprayed out. Right at this moment, Yi Xian's furious howl suddenly resounded. "Soul Subduer." As soon as his voice resounded, a mysterious force enveloped the hunchbacked old man. Soul Subduer. At the moment that he was enveloped by this mysterious force, the hunchbacked old man's expression instantly changed violently, and he suddenly roared furiously. Bang! Yi Xian was blasted flying along with his sword. However, it wasn't long before Enrich suddenly appeared behind Yi Xian, and then she placed her palm against Yi Xian's back. Bang! Yi Xian had stopped moving, but Enrich had retreated explosively by over 100 m again. Yi Xian raised his head to look at the hunchbacked old man. At this moment, the old man's body was trembling violently while a mysterious force was ceaselessly breaking down the old man's soul. At the same time, fresh blood was seeping out from the center of the hunchbacked old man's forehead. Right at this moment, the hunchbacked old man suddenly placed his palm against his chest. Subduer. As soon as his voice resounded. Bang! A formidable aura suddenly surged out from within him. After a short moment, the old man's body gradually returned to normal. Yi Xian's face fell when he witnessed this scene. "I've failed." Even the boundless sword and soul subduer sword hadn't been able to instantly annihilate the hunchbacked old man. Yi Xian's eyes slowly closed. "It's because my cultivation is too low. I'm utterly unable to bring forth the full might of the boundless sword." At this moment, the hunchbacked old man and the others had extremely solemn expressions. Especially the hunchbacked old man. He stared fixedly at Yi Xian because he'd almost been killed by Yi Xian in that instant just now. Would anyone dare to believe this? In the beginning, even though he knew that Yi Xian was extremely monstrous, he'd never imagined that Yi Xian would be able to pose a threat to him. Because the gap between him and Yi Xian was too huge. It was so huge that external forces couldn't make up for it at all. Even if Yi Xian utilized the pagoda of prison, he was confident in his ability to resist it. However, he'd never imagined that Yi Xian would almost end his life with a single strike of his sword. A single strike. The hunchbacked old man stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "I really severely underestimated you." Yi Xian grinned. "Is that so?" The hunchbacked old man walked slowly towards Yi Xian. "Yi Xian, needless to say, you're extremely monstrous indeed." As soon as he finished speaking, he'd placed his right hand on the golden sword at his waist. Meanwhile, Enrich stood in front of Yi Xian. She opened her palm, and a spear appeared in her hand. The hunchbacked old man gazed at Enrich before he suddenly vanished. Enrich took a step forward, and the spear in her hand stabbed out like a lightning dragon. The hunchbacked old man didn't draw his sword, and he smashed his fist forward instead. Bang! Enrich retreated explosively. The hunchbacked old man didn't pursue Enrich, and he charged towards Yi Xian instead. Just as Mo Xia and Lian Wanli were about to take action, several powerful auras enveloped the two of them. On the other side, the hunchbacked old man had arrived before Yi Xian. As he gazed at Yi Xian, the hunchbacked old man revealed a savage smile. "Yi Xian, do you know what sword this is?" "It's the leader of swords. The leader of all swords in the world. As soon as this sword is drawn, all swords submit." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly drew his sword. A golden sword light shot into the sky. As soon as this sword was drawn, all swords in the world submit. However, the executing heaven sword in Yi Xian's hand wasn't convinced. Chapter 719. The head of a sword. What was the head of a sword? It was the head of all the swords in the world. Needless to say, Yi Xian instantly sensed a strand of powerful sword intent when the old man drew the golden sword. It was the sword intent of the sword itself. However, the executing heaven sword refused to accept it. The executing heaven sword. The sharpest sword in the universe all those years ago. Perhaps it wasn't the strongest sword, but it was definitely the sharpest. At this moment, a strand of monstrous sword intent erupted from the executing heaven sword as well. It was the battle intent of the sword itself. Yi Xian seized the opportunity to draw his sword and slash. A sword howl shook the sky. Bang! As soon as their swords collided, an expanse of light suddenly erupted in front of them. In an instant, the space in an area of almost 30 kilometers was shattered into pieces. But it didn't take long for the space in the surroundings to return to normal. Meanwhile, Yi Xian had retreated to the wall of sword energy once more, and a wisp of blood was seeping out from the corner of his mouth. The hunchbacked old man stared fixedly at Yi Xian. The swords in their hands were trembling violently. A moment of silence ensued before their swords suddenly struggled free from their grasp and slashed forward. Bang! An expanse of light erupted once more. In next to no time, the two swords were slashing madly at each other above their heads. The head of a sword. The executing heaven sword. Both swords were extremely furious. Especially the executing heaven sword. Yi Xian had never felt such rage from the executing heaven sword. It was fighting with its life on the line. Everyone was looking at the two swords as well. Needless to say, both of them were divine swords of this era. This time, they were clearly fighting for the first position. The hunchbacked old man gazed at the head of a sword, and then he waved his right hand with the intention of summoning it back. However, the head of a sword paid no attention to him. The hunchbacked old man's face fell. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Executing heaven sword. Slash it to death. Slash it to death." The executing heaven sword instantly howled when it received Yi Xian's encouragement, and then rays of light shot towards the head of a sword. The hunchbacked old man paid no attention to the head of a sword, and he gazed at Yi Xian. "Since the person behind you refuses to come out, then die. Let's attack together." As soon as they finished speaking, the four of them were about to attack. As for Enlancio and the other two at Yi Xian's side, they directly rushed out. Could he beat it? There was no way he could beat them. Because the difference in their realms was too great. But they wanted to fight. This time, they had already prepared for the worst. Boom, boom, boom. The three of them had just charged out when they were directly blasted flying, whereas the hunchbacked old man's group of three didn't pay any attention to Enlancio and the others, and they directly charged towards Yi Xian. Kill Yi Xian. Yi Xian was their biggest threat. Yi Xian revealed a savage smile when he saw the four of them charge at him, and then he roared furiously. In the next moment, an illusory shout suddenly appeared between his brows. Prison pagoda. Boom. A powerful pressure directly enveloped the hunchbacked old man and the other three, and their speed also slowed down at this moment. Looking at the world prison pagoda between Yi Xian's brows, the expressions of the four turned somewhat sinister. They naturally wouldn't be frightened by Yi Xian. The four of them sped up, and their formidable auras swept towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian was about to activate the world prison pagoda when the four of them suddenly stopped, and then they immediately turned around while an extremely formidable aura swept over. Their expressions changed, and they attacked in unison. Rumble. Along with the sound of an explosion, the four of them were blasted back repeatedly, and they retreated for an entire 3 kilometers. Yi Xian and the others were stunned. They looked towards the distance, and they saw a woman walking over slowly. Yi Xian was stunned when he saw her. In the next moment, he flew over to the woman and embraced her. "Big sister, you're finally here." It was Jian Zizai. Jian Zizai that he hadn't seen for a very long time. The former #1 genius of the god race. Being hugged by Yi Xian, Jian Zizai was slightly stunned. In the next moment, a force directly shook Yi Xian away. She looked at Yi Xian. "Big sister?" Yi Xian smiled awkwardly. "Aren't you my big sister?" Jian Zizai. At this moment, Yi Xian walked in front of Jian Zizai with a bitter expression. "Big sister, you're finally here." "I'm so miserable." Jian Zizai. He had contacted Jian Zizai a long time ago, but the other party had never responded to him. This time, he didn't expect her to actually come back. She's back. For the first time, Yi Xian felt that Jian Zizai was very kind. Jian Zizai looked at Yi Xian and nodded slightly. "Not bad, not bad. Your aura is actually so strong. It seems that ordinary people at the half-step ascension stage are no match for you." Yi Xian said in a deep voice. "They're bullying the weak." Bullying the weak. Jian Zizai looked at the hunchbacked old man and the others not far away. She looked at the four of them. Extreme ascension stage. Extreme ascension stage. The hunchbacked old man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who are you?" Jian Zizai smiled slightly. "Jian Zizai." The hunchbacked old man frowned slightly. "Never heard of you." Jian Zizai suddenly disappeared. Bang! The hunchbacked old man's entire body flew thousands of feet away. When he stopped, there was a red palm print on the right side of his face. Jian Zizai looked at the hunchbacked old man. "Have you heard of me now?" The hunchbacked old man looked at Jian Zizai. He was not angry, there was only solemnity in his eyes. "You. Half-step unknown." Half-step unknown? Jian Zizai's lips curled up slightly. "Guess." The hunchbacked old man stared at Jian Zizai. "Who are you to Yi Xian?" Jian Zizai glanced at Yi Xian. "Who am I to you?" Yi Xian quickly said, "Big sister." "You're my big sister." Jian Zizai laughed, then looked at the hunchbacked old man. "Did you hear that?" The hunchbacked old man looked at Jian Zizai. "I thought that the woman in the plain dress would appear, but she didn't. Instead, his so-called big sister came." "The woman in the plain dress?" Jian Zizai looked at the hunchbacked old man. "You want her to appear?" The hunchbacked old man was expressionless. "Can't I?" "Haha." Jian Zizai suddenly laughed. After laughing for a moment, she looked at Yi Xian. "These enemies of yours are so funny." Yi Xian, Jian Zizai looked at the hunchbacked old man, a playful smile on the corner of his mouth. "Do you know who the woman in the plain dress is?" The hunchbacked old man said, "I don't know." Jian Zizai shook his head. "You guys are really a bunch of pigs." "No, I shouldn't insult pigs." The hunchbacked old man's expression was a bit ugly. He stared at the woman in the plain dress. "Since she won't appear, then you will die in her place." As his voice fell, he opened his palm. A talisman suddenly flew out. The next moment, boom! A monstrous pressure suddenly appeared in the air. Jian Zizai looked up, and the sky suddenly darkened. Soon, a starry sky appeared above everyone's heads. Endless starry sky. Jian Zizai looked at the hunchbacked old man, who smiled ferociously, his right hand suddenly spinning, galaxy ashes. As his voice fell, the starry sky above everyone's head suddenly burned, and countless starlight began to turn into little flames, shooting towards Jian Zizai below. The starry sky burned. Jian Zizai's right foot suddenly stomped lightly. Boom! Her entire body had already appeared in the starry sky, and the next moment, the starry sky began to become illusory bit by bit. Seeing this scene, the expressions of the hunchbacked old man and the others changed. At this moment, the hunchbacked old man suddenly became angry. "God-slaying rope." As his voice fell, 4 golden lights suddenly appeared around him, and the next moment, 4 golden ropes shot towards Jian Zizai. At the same time, the power of countless burning starlight continuously surged towards Jian Zizai. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian's expression immediately darkened. Would Jian Zizai be in danger? Yi Xian looked at the sky, and at this moment, Jian Zizai suddenly waved her right hand. In an instant, the power of starlight on her right disappeared without a trace, but the 4 golden threads did not disappear. Not only that, but the space around her was also covered by the golden threads. Layer upon layer. Jian Zizai frowned slightly, and she spread her hands. In an instant, the space around her began to tremble, and the golden threads began to slowly retreat, but soon, more golden threads appeared around her. Seeing this scene, the corners of Jian Zizai's mouth curled up slightly. Interesting. As if thinking of something, she suddenly looked at Yi Xian below. They want to hold me back. Hold Jian Zizai back. Yi Xian was stunned, and soon, his expression changed, and he looked at the hunchbacked old man not far away. The hunchbacked old man stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, do you know what those golden threads are? Yi Xian shook his head. I don't. The hunchbacked old man smiled and was about to speak, but at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from the sky. This thing can at most trap this woman for 15 minutes, continue talking nonsense. The hunchbacked old man didn't waste his breath when he heard this, and he looked at Yi Xian. In the next moment, he was about to attack. However, right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Don't all of you want this treasure? I'll give it to you." As soon as he finished speaking, the prison pagoda between his eyebrows suddenly floated out. A 5th-dimensional treasure. Seeing this 5th-dimensional treasure, the hunchbacked old man and the others immediately stopped, and their eyes were filled with greed. At this moment, the voice in the sky sounded again, "Idiot, he wants to stall for time. Deal with him first." Hearing this, the hunchbacked old man and the others recovered from their shock, and they looked at Yi Xian. Meanwhile, Yi Xian held the prison pagoda in his hand and tossed it into the sky. "For you." When they saw this scene, the expressions of the hunchbacked old man and the others instantly became extremely unsightly. They didn't attack again, and they instead looked up into the sky. But right at this moment, the prison pagoda suddenly descended. The prison pagoda descended firmly in front of Yi Xian. He didn't take it. Yi Xian's expression instantly sank when he saw this. Motherfucker. He actually didn't fall for it. He'd originally wanted to divert the conflict, but now it seemed like it was hopeless. The hunchbacked old man stared fixedly at Yi Xian. This person is a calamity, deal with him first. As soon as he finished speaking, he directly charged out. Behind him, Chen Biejiang and the other 2 charged out as well. When he saw the 4 of them charge at him, Yi Xian's expression instantly became ferocious. Just as he was about to fight to the death, a little girl suddenly fell in front of him. The little girl's right hand was in her trouser pocket, and her left hand was holding a stick of candied hawthorn. Her right foot was gently stomping, and she was even humming an unknown tune. The river flows however it pleases. The stars in the sky go. Where do they go? Hey-ya, chicken ah. He, Yuria. If you see injustice on the road, hammer ah. Chicken ah. Ayaya. P.S. Asking for votes. Chapter 720. A little girl. When he saw the little girl, Yi Xian immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Before coming here, he had already asked Shaolinger to call this little girl. He definitely would not fight to the death with the Xianyuan family and the other forces alone, because he could not win. What he did not expect was that this little girl was a little slow. If it were not for Jian Zizai's appearance, he would have been dead. The little girl stood in front of Yi Xian. She was dressed in a strange way, and she had a candied haw in her mouth. She looked a little wild. When they saw the little girl appear, the expressions of the hunchbacked old man and the others immediately became serious. They had not forgotten that it was this person who had killed the sword martial sect master with a single punch. They were quite afraid of this little girl. The little girl glanced at Yi Xian. Who do you want to hit? Hit who? The corners of Yi Xian's mouth twitched slightly. This little girl was so direct. Yi Xian pointed to the hunchbacked old man and the others not far away. Hit them. The little girl turned to look at the hunchbacked old man. She sized him up. Come here, I'll kill you. Yi Xian was speechless. The hunchbacked old man stared at the little girl. Who the hell are you? As the top force in the black-yellow great world, their intelligence was absolutely top-notch. However, they knew nothing about the people behind Yi Xian. They could not find anything. Whether it was the woman in the plain dress from before, the little girl who had just appeared, or Jian Zizai in the sky, they knew nothing. The little girl ignored the hunchbacked old man. She licked the candied haw. Wait for me to finish eating. I'll kill you. Yi Xian was speechless. In the distance, the hunchbacked old man smiled sinisterly. How arrogant of you. The little girl looked at the hunchbacked old man and did not speak. She stomped her little feet lightly in a very rhythmic manner. At this moment, the Heaven Gates sect master suddenly disappeared beside the hunchbacked old man. The next moment, he had strangely appeared in front of the little girl. At the same time, a dagger directly slashed at the little girl's throat. But the little girl did not dodge. Yi Xian's expression instantly changed drastically when he witnessed this scene, and he was about to attack. However, the next scene stunned him. At the instant that the Heaven Court sect master's dagger slashed at the little girl's throat, the dagger instantly shattered into powder. At the same time, the Heaven Court sect master was blasted over 1 kilometer away. Yi Xian wasn't the only one who was stunned. Everyone else was stunned as well. In the distance, the Heaven Gates sect master looked at the little girl, his eyes filled with disbelief. How is this possible? He was unscathed. Everyone was stunned. This little girl had withstood a blow from the Heaven Gates sect leader and was actually completely unscathed. This body, Yi Xian, who was behind the little girl, was also stunned. He had always thought that his physical body was strong enough, but compared to this little girl, it was simply weak. At this moment, the little girl suddenly raised her head and looked at the 2 swords in the sky. When she saw the 2 swords, she frowned. Sword heads? Sword head? The hunchbacked old man stared fixedly at the little girl. You recognize the swords of my Xianyuan clan. The little girl glanced at the hunchbacked old man. The Xianyuan clan? It clearly belongs to my Snowy. As soon as she finished speaking, she gestured with her right hand, and a powerful force enveloped the sword head. Moreover, the sword head actually erupted with a ray of dazzling light that slashed towards this force. The little girl frowned when she witnessed this scene. In the next moment, she suddenly vanished, and when she appeared once more, this chapter isn't finished, please continue to the next page. In the air, she grabbed the hilt of the sword. The sword head trembled violently and was about to resist when the little girl raised her hand and slapped it. Slap! The sword head trembled violently, and the light it emanated was instantly obliterated. The little girl slapped the sword head again. Just like that, around 15 minutes later, the sword head started to tremble and didn't dare resist anymore. The little girl gazed at the sword head with an emotionless expression. Do you not recognize me? The sword head trembled as if it was saying something. The little girl frowned. Its consciousness is dormant. When she spoke up to hear, she tossed the sword in front of Yi Xian. Awaken its consciousness. Yi Xian was stunned, and then he asked, how do I awaken it? The little girl said, give it sword intent. Yi Xian hurriedly released his sword intent, and the sword started to madly absorb Yi Xian's sword intent. The hunchbacked old man suddenly spoke angrily, that's the divine sword of my Xianyuan clan, you. The little girl looked at the hunchbacked old man. How shameless. What divine sword of your clan? It's clearly mine. The hunchbacked old man spoke angrily, you. The little girl suddenly punched through the air. Bang! Without any warning, the hunchbacked old man was blasted 3 kilometers away, and the sword formation and wall of sword chi in the surroundings exploded and vanished without a trace. The expressions of Chen Biejiang and the others from the sword martial school instantly became extremely solemn when they witnessed this scene. This little girl's strength isn't an ordinary monstrous genius. In the distance, blood flowed from the corners of the hunchbacked old man's mouth. That punch just now had severely injured his internal organs. She's too strong. The hunchbacked old man had an extremely solemn expression on his face. This little girl's strength is truly too terrifying. She's not a match for him at all. A sword howl suddenly resounded in the distance. The little girl looked at Yi Xian. The sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly trembled violently, and then it flew over to the little girl and trembled slightly as if it was saying something. The little girl nodded, "Long time no see." The sword trembled slightly, and then it flew around the little girl. Meanwhile, the little girl suddenly shook her head. "Bai is very far away, and you can't find him." Look, I'm a clone, and I left it here a very long time ago. At that time, I was still very weak, and the clone I left behind was a little weak as well. So, I can't take you there." The sword trembled slightly, and then it emanated a weak sword howl. The little girl was silent for a moment, and then she looked at Yi Xian. "You go with him. He should be looking for Brother Yang in the future." The sword turned to face Yi Xian, and Yi Xian hurriedly said, Yes, I'll take you to find him in the future." The little girl said, "Bye." "Bye?" Yi Xian asked, "That little guy?" The little girl nodded, "I'm invincible in the daytime." "Yi Xian." The little girl said, "Just follow him, he's one of us." "One of us?" Yi Xian looked at the little girl. "I'm one of us?" The little girl nodded, "One of us." Yi Xian chuckled, "Yes, I'm one of us." The little girl clapped her hands, and then turned to look at the hunchbacked old man and the other two. "I've finished eating the tanghulu. All of you, die." As soon as her voice fell, she suddenly rushed out. Her physical body directly tore through space. Seeing this scene, the hunchbacked old man's face instantly changed. "Help me." As soon as his voice fell, he suddenly slammed his hands together. "This chapter isn't finished, please continue to the next page." He clenched his fist tightly, and then he smashed it forward. At the same time, the others by his side charged out as well. 4 of them. The little girl wasn't afraid in the face of the 4 of them, and she raised her hand and smashed her fist forward. It was a very simple punch. But it was very violent. She smashed her fist forward. Rumble. The space in front of the little girl collapsed, and a powerful force instantly blasted the hunchbacked old man and the others away. Amongst them, the hunchbacked old man's body directly exploded, and only his soul remained. Moreover, the other 3 were heavily injured at this moment. The little girl's strength was too terrifying. Not far away, after the hunchbacked old man stopped, he suddenly looked up into the sky and roared furiously, "What are you waiting for?" The little girl looked up into the sky, and then she took out another tanghulu and licked it before she said, "Should I?" Amidst the clouds, the white-clothed man from the temple stared fixedly at the little girl and didn't speak. The little girl looked at the hunchbacked old man nearby. "He doesn't dare to attack. Just wait for me to finish eating this tanghulu, and then I'll kill all of you." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then he said, "Why don't we kill them first before eating it?" The little girl thought for a moment, and then she passed the tanghulu to Yi Xian. "Hold it for me." Yi Xian hurriedly took it. The little girl walked towards the hunchbacked old man and the others, and she grinned, "Actually, I really want to eat someone." At this point, she seemed to have thought of something, and then she said softly, "Brother Yang isn't here. I can eat him. In any case, he doesn't know." "Huh." As soon as she finished speaking, she charged forward. The hunchbacked old man and the others' expressions changed drastically. Meanwhile, the master of the heaven gate suddenly charged forward, and at the instant he charged forward, numerous afterimages appeared behind him. He was swift to the extreme. In practically the blink of an eye, he slashed his saber at the two horns on the little girl's head. Bang! In front of everyone's eyes, the Sky Gate's sect master's saber directly turned into dust. Everyone was dumbfounded when they saw this. Just as the Heaven Gate's sect leader was about to retreat, the little girl grabbed his throat with one hand. The master of the Heaven Gate glared at Yi Xian. Why? Why? You. Right at this moment, the little girl suddenly opened her mouth and bit down. Pfft! Under everyone's gazes, the little girl swallowed the master of the Heaven Gate's head. Everyone was speechless. Yi Xian's mind went blank. The little girl said that she wanted to eat people. She wasn't joking. She wasn't joking. She really would eat people. Yi Xian's scalp went numb from watching this. It was too bloody. Just like that, under everyone's gazes, the little girl swallowed the master of the Heaven Gate. Not far away, the hunchbacked old man and the others had started to tremble. At this moment, the little girl walked over to Yi Xian and stretched out her hand. Yi Xian hurriedly passed the tanghulu to her. The little girl took the tanghulu, licked it, and said softly, "It doesn't seem as delicious as the tanghulu." Yi Xian gulped, and then said, "You really eat people?" The little girl looked at Yi Xian. "Do you eat pork?" Yi Xian nodded, "Yes." The little girl spread her hands. "If you can eat demon beasts, why can't demon beasts eat you?" Yi Xian was speechless. End of this chapter. Chapter 721. Hearing the little girl's words, Yi Xian could not refute it. Humans killed other weak animals for food, so why couldn't other powerful creatures eat humans? This was a question worth thinking about. At that moment, the little girl suddenly asked, "What did I eat just now?" Yi Xian was struck dumb. Then he hurried to say, "No, you only ate candied haws. You didn't eat anything else." The little girl looked at Yi Xian and blinked. "Really?" Yi Xian nodded. "Really?" The little girl nodded. "I'm a vegetarian." "Yes, I only eat vegetables." Yi Xian was speechless. The little girl licked the candied hawthorn in her hand, then looked at the hunchbacked old man and the other two not far away. At that moment, the expressions of the three of them had become extremely serious. No, it should be said that they were afraid. This little girl really ate people. At that moment, a shocking explosion suddenly erupted in the air. Soon, a woman appeared in front of Yi Xian. Jian Zizai. Jian Zizai patted the sleeves of her dress on her chest and said with a smile, "That formation is a little interesting." Seeing Jian Zizai, the hunchbacked old man not far away had an abnormally calm expression. Yi Xian faced the little girl. The little girl looked at Jian Zizai, and Jian Zizai also looked at the little girl. The little girl looked at Jian Zizai and nodded. "You should be quite good at fighting." Jian Zizai smiled and said, "Are you a monster?" The little girl nodded. Jian Zizai asked again, "What species?" Yi Xian was speechless. The little girl touched the horns on her head and said, "I might be a cow type." The corner of Yi Xian's mouth twitched slightly. This little girl did not know what she was. Jian Zizai walked in front of the little girl. She glanced at the pair of horns on the little girl's head and said, "What level has your physical body reached?" What level had her physical body reached? Yi Xian and the others also looked at the little girl. This was also what they wanted to know. Under everyone's gaze, the little girl waved her hand again, and the executing heaven sword flew directly into her hand. The next moment, she held the executing heaven sword and slashed at her own head. Bang! The executing heaven sword trembled violently, emitting a trembling sound. But nothing happened to the little girl. The executing heaven sword did not even leave a mark on her head. Seeing this, everyone's expressions changed. Especially Yi Xian. He knew very well how terrifying the executing heaven sword was, but this little girl actually resisted it. He was unscathed. What kind of monster was this? The little girl flicked the executing heaven sword in her hand, then looked at Yi Xian. There is no sword in the world that can break through my defense, but there is someone who can. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before asking, will the 3 swords at the top of the tower work? The little girl shook her head. They can't. Without their master, I can smash them into pieces with one punch. Yi Xian asked again, can you defeat the owner of the sword at the top of the tower? The little girl paused for a moment, and then she said, logically speaking, I'm younger than them, much younger. Do you understand? Yi Xian hurriedly nodded. Yes, I understand. The little girl licked her candied fruit, and then she gazed at the hunchbacked old man and the others. It's time to end this. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly clenched her right fist. Bang! A powerful force suddenly condensed in her fist. At this moment, the expressions of everyone here changed drastically. Jian Zizai's eyes were also filled with a trace of astonishment. This little girl's strength was not ordinary. The hunchbacked old man raised his head and looked up into the sky. He knew that the divine hall would not come to help. Pine City, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian is untalented and unvirtuous. From this moment onward, Yi Xian is removed from his position as prince and will be succeeded by Yi Lang. It was an old man in a black robe who spoke. A young man stood not too far behind the old man, and he had a faint smile on the corners of his mouth. It was Yi Lang. The elders of the Yi estate stood on both sides of the young man. Why? Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone looked towards the source of the voice and saw a little girl standing at the entrance. She was around 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the corners of her dress. Her face was sickly pale, and she seemed slightly weak. Moreover, there was a trace of timidity in her eyes. The little girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan intended to remove Yi Xian from his position, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed slightly to everyone within the ancestral hall, and then she said timidly, Grand Elder, my older brother, Yi Xian, is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Grand Elder glanced coldly at Yi Ling, this is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting for? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid, and did not dare to look directly at the Grand Elder. However, she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and entered the ancestral hall. Once again, she bowed to the elders, Dear elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan. He's fighting for the clan, and we don't know if he's dead or alive. Yet, the clan is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is unfair. Impudent. The Grand Elder suddenly raged, whether he's stripped of his position or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed, he should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Grand Elder replied coldly, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, this is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the clan. This is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, young master Yi Lang inherits the prince's position, and it's the wish of everyone. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she didn't cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard, and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "This subordinate, Zhang Mu, greets the prince." Yi Lang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the prince, I'll need 10 personal guards. From now on, you'll be my personal guard." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and hurriedly bowed deeply. "This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the prince, and I'm willing to die 1,000 deaths." Yi Lang nodded. "Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall, do not hold back." "Understood." Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the killing intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this time, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and he suddenly stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was dressed in a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from the Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Within the ancestral hall, all the elders were frowning. The great elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak, when Yi Xian suddenly leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pang! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop, and he rushed towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped down on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pang! Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The girl called Yi Ling bowed to everyone in the hall, as she asked timidly, "Great elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The great elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. "This is a matter of the clan, what are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the great elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, "Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged, whether he's crippled or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The great elder replied coldly, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the position of prince. What are you yelling about?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry, and only covered her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard, and smiled, "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded, "You're not bad. After I become the prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and quickly bowed deeply. "I'll go through fire and water for the prince, and I'll do anything for you." Yi Lang nodded, "Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Don't hold back, understand?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu saw something, and suddenly stopped. Inside the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside the hall. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe, and the robe was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder squinted his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pang! Zhang Mu felt dizzy, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and rushed towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu, and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pang! You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.